Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it because the light didn't spread the way it should have. I was already awake, sitting at the small table by the window in the cabin, watching the sky start to change. I'd gotten up early on purpose. Couldn't sleep, and I figured I might as well catch the sunrise over the water. The cabin sits a bit above the shoreline, nothing fancy. Just a place my friend Callum lets me use sometimes. No neighbors nearby, just a long stretch of coast and a few scattered trees. It had been dark when I woke up. Not completely black, but that early pre-dawn kind of dark where everything is just outlines. I made coffee, sat down, and waited. Normally, the light starts to build evenly. The horizon gets a little brighter, then it spreads out across the sky. That's not what happened. At first, I thought I was seeing it wrong. There was a faint brightness along the horizon, but only in one spot, a narrow section, like a vertical strip. I leaned forward slightly, see white squinting. The rest of the sky stayed dark, just that one band growing brighter. I glanced at the edges of the horizon, expecting the light to spread sideways like it usually does. It didn't. It stayed contained. A tall, narrow column of light reaching upward from the horizon. I set my mug down slowly. The brightness increased. Not quickly. Steady, but it didn't widen. It just stretched upward. I stood up and moved closer to the window. The glass was cold against my hand. I stepped outside onto the small porch. The air was still. No wind, no sound from the water below. I looked straight at it. The band of light was brighter now. Still narrow, still vertical. It didn't look like sunlight breaking through clouds. It looked separate, defined, like a slice of brightness cut into the sky. I felt that quiet unease start to build. Not fear, just the sense that something wasn't behaving the way it should. I checked the rest of the horizon again. Still dark. No gradual glow, no spreading light, just that one column. I glanced at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back up. The light reached higher now, extending further into the sky. The edges weren't sharp, but they were clear enough that you could tell where it ended. It didn't blend into the surrounding darkness the way normal light does. It just stopped. I took a step forward on the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, louder than they should have been. The air felt heavier, subtle, like pressure. I swallowed. My ears popped slightly, then settled. I looked back at the light. For a moment, I thought I saw something within it, more like a faint shift, like something passing through it. Then it was gone. The brightness held steady. I stood there, trying to understand what I was seeing. The ocean below was still dark, no reflection of the light on the water. That didn't make sense. Even a faint glow should have caught on the surface, but it didn't. The water stayed black. I took another step forward. The pressure in the air increased slightly, not uncomfortable, just noticeable. I felt it in my chest, a dull, steady weight. The light pulsed once, very faint. A slight increase in brightness, then back down. At the same time, the pressure peaked, then eased. I exhaled slowly without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Then it started to retract, not downward, upward. The bottom of the light, the part touching the horizon, began to lift, slowly, like it was being pulled away from the ground. The column shortened. The brightness stayed the same, just less of it. I stepped back slightly. The pressure eased again. The light continued to move upward. The lower edge climbed higher and higher until the entire column was suspended above the horizon, detached. I felt my chest tighten slightly. The air felt quieter. Even the faint sounds from the shoreline seemed muted. I stood there, watching. The column shrank further, retracting upward. The top edge didn't move, just the bottom rising to meet it, until it became a smaller, concentrated patch, then smaller still, a faint, vertical streak, then a point, and then nothing. No fade, no transition, just not there anymore. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty sky, waiting. The horizon began to brighten normally, slow, even light spreading outward, like it always should have. I looked down at the water. Now it reflected the light, soft ripples catching the early glow. Everything looked normal again. I checked my phone. The time didn't match. I was sure I'd only been outside for a few minutes. The phone said nearly 20 had passed. I went back inside and sat down. The coffee had gone cold. I stared out the window as the sun finally came up. This time, the light spread the way it should. Nothing unusual. But I kept looking at that spot on the horizon, trying to line up where the column had been. It didn't match where the sun rose, not even close. I stopped because the compass didn't make sense. It wasn't wildly off, just enough to catch my attention. I was hiking along a narrow ridge trail, the kind that runs with a drop on one side and a long slope on the other. It wasn't a difficult path, but it's easy to lose direction up there if you're not paying attention. I'd gone out later than I should have. The sun had already dipped low, leaving that dull orange light sitting along the horizon. Everything else was fading into blue. I pulled the compass out of my jacket pocket and held it flat in my hand. The needle drifted slightly to the right. I rotated my body, expecting it to settle properly. It didn't. It lagged, then stopped again, still off. I frowned and tapped the side of it lightly. Nothing changed. I held it further out, away from my body. Same result. The needle just sat there, a few degrees off where it should have been. I looked around, half expecting to see something obvious. Metal, power lines, anything that could interfere. There was nothing. Just rock, low grass, and the long stretch of sky ahead. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual up there, but I still noticed it. I looked back at the compass. The needle shifted again, slowly, not snapping into place, just drifting a little more. Then stopping. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in, not panic, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I put the compass back in my pocket and kept walking. The trail followed the ridge, curving slightly as it went. The light was fading faster now. The horizon ahead was darker, the last bit of orange thinning out. I walked for a couple of minutes, trying to ignore it. Then I pulled the compass out again. The needle was moving, not spinning, but not stable either. It drifted a few degrees, paused, then drifted again. Like it couldn't settle on a direction. I stopped walking, stood there for a second, watching it. Then I looked up. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, just above the horizon, slightly to the left of where the sun had gone down. At first I thought it was just leftover light, but it wasn't spread out. It was contained. A small, dim patch. I stared at it, didn't move, didn't change shape, just sat there. Then it pulsed, once. A subtle increase in brightness, then back down. Not like lightning, not sharp or sudden, just a slow swell, then release. I felt something in my chest when it happened, not pain, just a brief pressure. I took a step back without thinking. The compass in my hand jerked slightly. Not a smooth movement, a quick shift. Then it stopped. The needle pointed somewhere I didn't expect. Not north, not anything that made sense with the terrain. I looked back up. The glow was still there, but dimmer now, fading into the dark. I stood there for a second longer, waiting for it to pulse again. It didn't. It just blended back into the horizon, like it had never been separate from it. I looked around the ridge. Everything looked the same. No movement, no sound. The wind had dropped completely. Even my footsteps felt quieter than they should have been. I checked the compass again. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing north. I turned slowly, trying to recalibrate. It didn't follow correctly. It lagged behind my movement, then settled somewhere else entirely. I felt that tightness in my chest again, not fear, just confusion. I put the compass away and looked at the trail. Tried to rely on memory instead. The path ahead looked slightly different. Not dramatically, just enough that I hesitated. A rock I didn't remember. A slight bend that felt off. I turned and looked back the way I'd come. It didn't look quite right either. I stood there, trying to orient myself. Then I noticed something else. The light had dropped more than it should have. It felt later than it was. Darker. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time didn't make sense. It showed nearly an hour later than when I'd last checked. I stared at it for a second, trying to figure out if I just lost track of time. But it didn't feel like that long. I looked back toward the horizon. No glow. Just darkness now. I took a slow breath and started walking again. Carefully, watching the ground, trying to follow the path as best as I could. After a few minutes, the terrain started to feel more familiar. The slope eased. The rocks looked like ones I remembered passing earlier. I kept moving. Didn't stop again. Eventually, I reached the lower part of the trail where it widened out and led toward the tree line. I didn't feel that pressure anymore. The air felt normal. The sounds came back gradually, faint wind, distant movement in the trees. I stopped at the edge of the woods and pulled the compass out one more time. The needle pointed north, steady, exactly where it should have. I turned slowly. It followed perfectly, no lag, no drift. I stood there for a second, looking back up at the ridge. The horizon was just a dark line now, nothing unusual, no glow, no movement. But something about it didn't sit right. The position of that light, when I tried to picture it later, didn't line up with where the sun had set. I was lying on the hood of my car when I noticed it. It was late, maybe around 11:30, out near the edge of town where the streetlights thin out and the sky actually looks like a sky. I'd driven out there before just to sit and clear my head. That night was cold but clear, no clouds, just a wide stretch of stars. My friend Lewis had bailed last minute, so it was just me. I'd parked by a dirt pull-off next to a field. No houses nearby, just open land and a tree line further out. The engine had been off long enough that everything was quiet again. I was just staring up, not really thinking about anything. At first, nothing stood out, just the usual patterns, the same clusters I always pick out when I'm bored. Then I noticed one of them looked off. It wasn't obvious, just a small shift. There's this group of stars I recognize because it forms a kind of bent line. I don't know the name, but I always use it as a reference point. One of those stars looked slightly out of place, not far, just enough that the shape didn't line up the way it should. I squinted a bit, thinking maybe my angle was off or I'd moved my head without realizing. I adjusted slightly on the hood, trying to match the position I remembered. The other stars stayed where they should. That one didn't. It sat just a bit too far to the right. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to convince myself I'd just remembered the pattern wrong, but I hadn't. I'd looked at that same patch of sky plenty of times. It wasn't like this. I sat up a little, resting on my elbows. The star didn't flicker more than the others, didn't change brightness. It just sat there, slightly out of alignment. Then it moved, slowly, not like a plane, not like a satellite either. It didn't travel across the sky. It shifted, just a small drift, back toward where it should have been. I held my breath without meaning to. It wasn't fast, just steady. Over a few seconds, it slid back into place until it matched the pattern again perfectly. Then it stopped. I stayed there, staring at it, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. It looked exactly like the other stars now. Same brightness, same position. If I hadn't been watching it, I wouldn't have noticed anything. I sat up fully, my legs still stretched out across the hood. Something about it didn't sit right. Stars don't move like that. Not like that. I looked around the rest of the sky. Everything else looked normal. No other shifts, no movement, just the usual. I leaned back again, trying to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. After a minute or two, I noticed something else. The air felt different, not colder, just stiller, like the sound had dropped out again. I hadn't realized there'd been any sound before, just the faint background noise you don't notice until it's gone. I listened. Nothing. Even the distant hum from the road I'd driven in on felt gone. I sat up again. That same patch of sky caught my attention. The star was still there in the correct position, but now it looked slightly brighter than before. Not by much, just enough that it stood out if you focused on it. I watched it closely. It didn't move. Then, for a second, it dimmed, just slightly. Then returned to normal. I glanced down at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual, but it added to the feeling. I checked the time, 11:42. That seemed about right. I locked the phone and set it on my chest. Looked back up. The star looked normal again, same as the others. I tried to focus on something else, another part of the sky, but my eyes kept drifting back. After a while, I noticed something else. The pattern around it looked tighter, not physically closer, just more precise. Like the positions had snapped into place more exactly than before. I shook my head slightly, trying to clear it. That didn't make sense. Stars don't shift into better alignment. I sat up again and swung my legs off the hood, stood next to the car, looking up. The cold hit a bit more when I stood still. I shoved my hands into my pockets. The star didn't move again. Everything looked stable, but the feeling stayed. That something had adjusted. not moved away, just corrected itself. I looked down at my phone again, unlocked it. The time read 12:18. I stared at it for a second. That couldn't be right. I hadn't been out there that long. It felt like maybe 15 minutes since I'd checked, not over half an hour. I scrolled through my notifications. Nothing new, no missed calls, no messages. I looked back up at the sky. Everything looked the same. That same pattern. That same star, perfectly in place. If I hadn't seen it before, I wouldn't have questioned it. I stood there for a bit longer, just watching, waiting for it to shift again. It didn't. Eventually, I got back in the car, started the engine. The sound felt louder than it should have been, like it was breaking through something that had been holding everything down. I sat there for a minute, looking through the windshield, the sky still visible above the dashboard. Nothing moved. I drove home after that. Didn't stop again. When I got back, I parked in my driveway and sat there for a second. Looked up one more time. The sky looked normal. No stars out of place, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't caught something passing through. I'd caught something correcting itself, like it had been in the wrong place for a moment, and then fixed it before I could understand what I was seeing. I only noticed it because of the timestamp jump. I wasn't even looking for anything unusual. I just check my camera footage every now and then out of habit. The camera covers my backyard, nothing special, just a cheap setup after someone tried opening the shed a few months back. It was late afternoon when I checked it, scrolling through the previous night. Everything looked normal at first. The usual stuff, wind moving the branches, a cat cutting across the fence at around 1:12 a.m., nothing out of place. Then I hit 2:38. The footage froze for a split second. Not a full stop, just a slight stutter. Then the entire screen went white. Not bright like a light turning on. Completely washed out. No shapes, no shadows, just white. I paused it. The timestamp read 2:30 a.m. I stepped frame by frame. The image before it was normal. Dark yard, faint outlines of the fence and the tree. Then white. The next frame I could access was 2:38:24. 7 seconds missing. The image snapped back to normal like nothing had happened. No fade, no transition. Just normal again. I sat there for a minute staring at it. I replayed it, same thing. Normal, white, normal. With that gap in between, I checked the rest of the footage. Everything before and after was fine. No glitches, no other skips. Just that one moment. I leaned back in my chair, trying to think of what could cause that. Maybe a light, a car pulling in nearby with headlights hitting the camera, but even then you'd see some kind of shape, some direction to the light. This was just blank. I got up and went to the back door, looked out at the yard. Everything looked normal. Fence, tree, shed, no signs of anything unusual. I went back to the footage and watched it again, slowed it down, frame by frame. The white wasn't uniform in the way a normal overexposure would be. There were slight variations, faint shapes, but they didn't make sense, like the image had been stretched or distorted underneath the brightness. I zoomed in on one of the frames. The pixels broke apart, but the effect stayed. Something was there, not visible in a way I could define. Just not empty. I checked the camera settings. No motion alerts had triggered, no notifications. It hadn't registered anything. I checked the system logs. The camera had been recording continuously. No downtime, no errors, just that gap. I left it alone for a few hours after that, tried not to think about it, but it kept bothering me. Around 9 that night, I went outside, stood in the yard, looked at it from the same angle as the camera. The sky was clear, no clouds, no planes passing overhead. I looked at the tree. The branches were still, no wind. I stood there for a minute, trying to imagine what could have caused that kind of flash. Nothing came to mind. I went back inside, checked the footage again, same result. Then I noticed something else. Right before the flash, there was a subtle change, not in the light, in the shadows. The edges of things looked off, like they didn't line up perfectly. I zoomed in. The fence line looked slightly shifted. The tree branches didn't match their usual positions. It was only for a frame. Then the white hit. Then everything returned to normal. I felt that slow, creeping unease settle in. I kept watching. Then I decided to check the live feed. Everything looked normal. Dark yard, same as always. I left it open on my phone and sat there. Nothing happened. After a while, I put the phone down and went to make something to eat. When I came back, I glanced at the screen. For a second, I thought I saw it again. A flicker. Not full white, just a quick brightening. I picked up the phone immediately. The feed looked normal, no sign of anything. I checked the recorded footage for that moment. Nothing. No skip, no flash, just normal video. I sat there for a bit, staring at it. Then I noticed the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd been in the kitchen for maybe 5 minutes. The clock said it had been closer to 15. I went back to the backyard again. Opened the door slowly. The air felt colder than before. Still. Quiet. I stepped outside, looked up. Nothing. Just the dark sky. I walked a few steps into the yard, turned around to look at the house. The camera was mounted above the door, angled down. I tried to picture what it would see. Then I noticed something. The ground beneath it looked slightly brighter, not illuminated. Just off, like the darkness there wasn't as deep as it should have been. I stepped closer. The feeling changed, subtle, like walking into a different pocket of air. I stopped, listened. Nothing. No sound at all. I looked back at the camera. For a second, I had this strong feeling that it wasn't just recording, that something had passed through that space, something the camera couldn't handle properly. I stepped back. The feeling eased. The yard looked normal again. I went back inside and shut the door. Checked the footage one more time before going to bed. That white flash was still there. The gap's still there. Nothing else changed. Later that night, I woke up for no clear reason. Checked my phone, 3:02 a.m. I opened the camera app. The live feed showed the yard. Normal. Still, but I noticed something at the very edge of the frame, near where the white flash had happened. The image looked slightly distorted, just a small area, like the pixels weren't lining up right. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then it snapped back to normal. I didn't go outside again. I just locked the phone and stayed in bed. The next morning, I checked the footage from that time. No distortion, no glitch, just the usual empty yard. But the gap from the night before was still there. 7 seconds, completely missing. And whatever caused it didn't leave anything behind the camera could actually show. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I first noticed it. Not in the room. My eyes were closed. At first I thought it was just one of those random flashes you get sometimes when you're tired. Little bits of light behind your eyelids, like your brain misfiring as you drift off. But this was different. It didn't flash. It built. Slowly. A faint glow, like something distant getting closer. I remember keeping my eyes closed on purpose, just to see what it would do. The light wasn't a color I could name properly. Not bright white, not yellow. Something softer, but still clear enough that I could tell it wasn't just darkness anymore. It spread evenly across my vision, like it wasn't coming from one direction. Just everywhere. I frowned a bit, still lying there, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then it got brighter. Not suddenly, gradually, like something increasing in intensity over time. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark. Exactly how it should have been. The curtains were shut, no light from outside, no glow from electronics except the faint numbers on my clock. I blinked a couple of times, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing unusual. I lay there for a second, waiting for the glow to come back. It didn't. I turned my head slightly and looked at the clock. 2:11 a.m. That seemed about right. I'd gone to bed maybe 20 minutes earlier. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes again. At first, there was nothing, just darkness. Then slowly it started again, that same faint glow. Building. I kept my eyes closed, paying closer attention this time. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, it just increased. Steady. I noticed something else. There was no sense of direction to it. It wasn't like light coming from the left or right. It felt like it was behind everything. Flat. Even. I shifted slightly in bed just to see if movement changed anything. It didn't. The glow continued to build, a bit brighter than before. I opened my eyes again. The room was still completely dark, no change at all. I pushed myself up slightly, leaning on one elbow. Checked the room more carefully this time. The door was closed. No light bleeding in from the hallway. The window was the same as before. Nothing outside. I checked the clock again. 2:17. I froze for a second. That didn't make sense. I was sure it hadn't been that long. It felt like maybe a minute or two since I last checked. Not 6. I stared at the numbers for a bit, waiting to see if they'd jump or correct themselves. They didn't. I sat there, trying to think back. I didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember drifting off. I'd been aware the whole time, or at least it felt that way. I lay back down slowly. My chest felt slightly tight, not from fear exactly, just from how focused I'd gotten. I closed my eyes again. Darkness. For a few seconds. Then the glow returned. Stronger this time. It didn't start as faint, it was already there, just below the level where I'd opened my eyes before. I stayed still, watching it. It kept building. I noticed that my breathing had slowed without me meaning to, like my body had adjusted to something. The glow grew brighter. Not blinding, but enough that it felt unnatural. I had this strong urge to open my eyes again, but I didn't. I wanted to see how far it would go. The brightness reached a point where it felt like it should be lighting the room, but I knew it wasn't, because I wasn't seeing it when my eyes were open. That's what didn't sit right. It was only there when I wasn't looking directly at it. I opened my eyes suddenly. Dark, same as before. No light anywhere. I sat up fully this time. Checked the clock again. 2:29. I felt a drop in my stomach. There was no way that much time had passed. I hadn't moved, hadn't fallen asleep, at least not that I remembered. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The room felt normal. No strange temperature, no sounds. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside looked normal. Empty street. No lights except the distant glow from a street lamp further down. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The clock. I looked at it again. 2:29. The seconds weren't moving. I stepped closer. They stayed frozen. I reached out and tapped it lightly. Nothing. Then suddenly it changed. 2:30. The seconds started moving again. I stood there for a second, watching it tick. Everything seemed normal again. I went back to the bed and sat down. I didn't lie back immediately. I just sat there, trying to piece together what had happened. Then, without thinking, I closed my eyes again. The glow was still there. Not building anymore. Just present. Faint, like it had settled into the background. I opened my eyes immediately. Dark. I didn't close them again after that. I stayed sitting up for a while, watching the clock. The time moved normally. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I lay back down, but I kept my eyes open. I must have fallen asleep at some point after that. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same. The clock was working fine. But when I thought back to it, I realized something I couldn't explain. I couldn't remember exactly when the glow had been the brightest. There wasn't a clear point where it peaked, just a sense that it had reached something. And I hadn't seen it when it did. I noticed it because I thought my headlights had gone out. I was driving back from a late shift around 1:40 a.m., taking the same rural road I always use to cut through the hills. It's a narrow road, no streetlights, just long stretches of open land and the occasional farmhouse set way back from the road. Normally, my headlights light up a decent stretch ahead. Not perfect, but enough to see bends coming. That night, everything was normal at first. Cold, clear, no rain. The sky was dark, but you could still see a few stars between the clouds. The road was dry, and there wasn't another car in sight. I had the radio on low, just background noise. Then, without warning, the road ahead just disappeared. Not completely, but the light didn't reach as far anymore. It was like someone had pulled a curtain forward in front of my car. The beam from my headlights just stopped, maybe 10 feet ahead instead of the usual distance. Everything beyond that point was swallowed in darkness. I instinctively slowed down, easing off the accelerator. My first thought was the lights had failed or dimmed, but when I glanced down, the dash looked normal. No warning lights, no flickering. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. The light was still there, but it didn't extend properly. It just cut off abruptly, like it was hitting something. Except there was nothing there. No fog, no dust, no rain. Just darkness. I tapped the high beams. They came on. But it didn't change anything. The lights still stopped at that same invisible line. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. The radio crackled slightly, like the signal dipped. Then it went quiet. Not static, just silence. I didn't like that. I slowed down more, maybe to 20. The road ahead stayed like that. The edges of the light were sharper than they should have been, like the beam had been trimmed. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind me looked normal. My taillights lit it up as expected. It was only the space in front of me that was wrong. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air rushed in, but there was no sound outside. No wind, no distant noise, nothing. Just the hum of the engine. Then even that seemed quieter. Not gone, just muted. I kept driving. Slow, careful. The darkness ahead didn't shift or react to me. It just stayed there, fixed at that distance. I had this weird thought that if I went faster, I'd just drive into it without seeing what was inside. So I didn't. I kept it slow. After maybe 10 seconds, I noticed something else. The edges of the road weren't as clear anymore. Normally, even in the dark, you can see the verge, the slight drop, or the grass. Now it looked flatter, less defined, like the light wasn't bouncing back the way it should. I glanced at my phone on the mount. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but something about it added to the feeling. I looked back up. The darkness seemed closer, not moving, just more present. I eased off the gas completely and let the car roll. For a second, I thought about stopping, but the idea of sitting there surrounded by that didn't feel right either, so I kept moving. Then, for a brief moment, I thought I saw something inside it, not a shape, more like a distortion, like heat haze, but darker. Something that didn't hold a clear outline. I blinked and leaned forward again. It was gone, or maybe it hadn't been there at all. The radio clicked suddenly, a short burst of sound like it was trying to reconnect, then silence again. I swallowed, trying to stay focused. My chest felt tight, not from fear exactly, just from how tense I'd gotten without realizing. I drove a few more seconds like that. Then it changed. Not gradually, all at once. The light extended forward again. The road snapped back into view, same as before. Same distance, same clarity. The darkness ahead retreated like it had never been there. I actually flinched a little, blinking at how sudden it was. The radio came back on mid-song, clear, no static. I checked the dashboard again, everything normal. I slowed down even more, almost stopping this time. I looked behind me, nothing unusual. I looked ahead. The road stretched out like it always did. No sign of anything blocking the light. I sat there for a second, engine idling, trying to process what had just happened. Then I noticed the time. I was sure I'd been driving that stretch for maybe a minute or two since it started. But the clock said nearly 10 minutes had passed. That didn't make sense. I hadn't driven far enough for that. I looked down the road again, trying to match it to where I should be. The next bend was closer than it should have been, like I'd covered more ground than I remembered. I stayed there for another few seconds. Nothing else changed. No return of the darkness. No flickering lights. Just normal. I started driving again. The rest of the way home was uneventful. No more issues with the headlights. No strange silence. Just the usual road, bends, and empty fields. When I pulled into my driveway, I left the engine running for a moment and turned the headlights toward the garage door. They looked normal, bright, steady, reaching as far as they should. I even got out and walked in front of the car, watching how the light hit the ground. Nothing unusual. The next day, I drove the same road in daylight, clear visibility. There's nowhere along that stretch where the road dips or curves in a way that would block the light like that. No structures, no trees close enough, just open land. But that night, for those few seconds, it felt like something had been sitting just beyond the reach of my headlights. And whatever it was, the light didn't pass through it. I noticed the compass first. It wasn't anything dramatic at the start, just a slight drift like the needle couldn't quite settle. I'd stopped on the ridge to get my bearings, more out of habit than necessity. The path was pretty clear, just a narrow trail cutting along the top, with a steep drop on one side and a slope of scrub and rock on the other. It was late afternoon when I'd started, but by the time I reached that section, it was getting into dusk. Not dark yet, but the light was fading fast, that dull gray-blue you get before everything drops off. I pulled the compass out of my jacket and held it flat. The needle wobbled. I waited. Normally it snaps into place within a second or two. This one kept drifting slightly past north, then easing back, then drifting again. Not spinning. Just off. I frowned and turned my body slightly, thinking maybe I was affecting it somehow. Same thing. I took a step to the side, away from the rocks, held it out again, still drifting. I tapped the casing lightly, The needle flicked, then started its slow, uneven movement again. That's when I started paying attention. Up until then, everything had felt normal. Wind moving across the ridge, distant sounds from the valley below, the usual. But as I stood there, waiting for the compass to settle, I noticed the wind had dropped. Not gradually, just gone. The air felt still. I looked up from the compass. The horizon stretched out ahead, a low line of hills fading into the distance. The sky above it was clear, no clouds, just that dimming light. I looked back down at the compass. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing north. It sat slightly off, angled maybe 10 degrees to the right. I turned slowly, trying to align myself with it. The needle didn't correct. It stayed fixed in that wrong position. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just something not lining up. I slipped the compass back into my pocket and looked around. The ridge felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, but muted. The distant sounds from the valley were gone. Even my own movement felt softer, like it wasn't carrying as far. I shifted my footing. Loose stones crunched under my boots, but the sound felt dull. I glanced back the way I'd come. The trail was still there, cutting back along the ridge. Nothing out of place. I turned forward again. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a faint glow just above the horizon, barely visible. I narrowed my eyes. The glow wasn't spreading. It wasn't like the last light of the day. It was contained, a small, soft patch hovering just above the line of the hills. I stood still, watching it. It didn't move, didn't change position, just sat there. Then it pulsed, once, slow. The brightness increased slightly, then dropped back down. At the same time, I felt a pressure in my ears, sharp, like when you descend too quickly. I swallowed, it didn't clear. I took a step back. The pressure eased slightly. I stopped, looked at the glow again. It was still there, unchanged. I took another step forward. The pressure came back, stronger. I froze in place, watching. The glow didn't pulse again, it just sat there, faint and steady. I tried to focus on it. The moment I did, it seemed to blur slightly, like it slipped just out of clarity. I blinked, looked slightly to the side. It became more defined again. That made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual up there, but it stood out. I looked at the time. It didn't match what I expected. I was sure I'd only stopped for a minute or two. The phone said nearly 10 minutes had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back up. The glow pulsed again. Once, same as before. A slow increase in brightness, then back down. The pressure in my ears peaked again. Stronger this time. I winced slightly. Then it stopped. The pressure dropped. The glow vanished. Not faded, not moved, just gone. The horizon looked normal again, just a dark line against the dim sky. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. The wind picked up again. Light at first, then steady. The distant sounds returned. Faint, but there. I reached for the compass again, pulled it out, held it flat. The needle snapped into place instantly, pointing north, exactly where it should. I turned slowly, checking it against the landscape. Everything lined up. Normal. I looked back at the horizon. Nothing unusual, no glow, no movement, just the fading light. I stood there a moment longer, then started walking again. The rest of the hike down felt normal. The sounds were right, the air felt right, but every now and then I'd glance back toward that part of the horizon. Half expecting to see that glow again, it never came back. But the way the compass had stopped, not spinning, not broken, just fixed in the wrong direction, felt like it had been pointing at something that wasn't there anymore. I woke up because something felt off before I even opened my eyes. Not a sound exactly. Just that awareness you get when something isn't where it should be. I reached for my phone on the nightstand out of habit. It wasn't there. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, same as when I'd gone to sleep. Curtains drawn, no light from outside, just the faint outline of things once my eyes adjusted. Then I noticed the glow on the floor, dim, coming from my phone. I sat up slowly and leaned over the side of the bed. It was lying face up, camera app open. Recording. I frowned, still half asleep, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't touched it since I went to bed. I picked it up. The screen showed the live camera view, but it was just darkness. The lens was pointed toward the far side of the room, near the window. I tapped the screen to stop the recording. My thumb hesitated for a second before I actually did it. I checked the timer. It had been recording for 12 minutes. That didn't make sense. I checked the time. 3:16 a.m. I was sure I'd fallen asleep around midnight. I sat there for a second, phone in my hand, trying to think. No memory of waking up, no memory of picking it up, no memory of starting the recording. I opened the video. It took a second to load. Then it started. At first, it was just darkness. The same view I was seeing now, just from a lower angle. The edge of the bed, the wall, the window, no sound, no movement. I scrubbed forward a bit, still nothing. Then I noticed it, near the window, a faint glow, barely visible. Not bright enough to light anything, just a soft patch of slightly lighter darkness. I paused the video, zoomed in. The image broke apart a bit, but the glow stayed. It wasn't reflecting off anything. The curtains didn't catch it. The wall didn't change. It just sat there, separate. I hit play again. The glow pulsed, slowly. A subtle increase in brightness, then back down. No flicker, no change in shape, just that steady rhythm. I felt a tightness in my chest, not fear, just confusion. I scrubbed back to the beginning of the glow, tried to see when it started. It wasn't there at first. Then it appeared. Gradually, like it had faded in. I watched it again. The pulsing stayed consistent. Slow. Even. I noticed something else. The angle of the phone wasn't stable. At the start of the video, it shifted slightly. Not like it had been dropped. More like it had been set down. Carefully. I didn't remember doing that. I kept watching. The glow continued. Then for a second, the image distorted. Not a full glitch, just a slight warping, like the edges of things didn't line up perfectly. Then it snapped back to normal. The glow pulsed again. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly. Then the glow started to fade, same way it had appeared, gradually, until it was barely visible, then gone. The rest of the video was just darkness again. No movement, no sound. I replayed it, watched it again from the start. Same thing, nothing. Glow, pulsing, nothing. I locked the phone and set it on the bed beside me. Then I looked at the window. The curtains were still, no light coming through, no movement. I got up slowly and walked over. The floor felt colder than it should have. I pulled the curtain aside slightly, looked out. Nothing, just the empty street. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed the air. Near the window, it felt different, slightly warmer, not by much, just enough to notice. I held my hand out. The air in front of the glass was warmer than the rest of the room. I stepped back. The temperature felt normal again. I looked down at the floor where my phone had been. Nothing there. No marks, no sign of anything. I picked the phone up again and checked the time. 3:22. I was sure I hadn't been standing there that long. I went back to bed, sat down, looked at the phone one more time. The video was still there, exactly the same. I didn't delete it. I didn't know why. I just left it. I lay back down, but I didn't close my eyes. I kept looking at the ceiling, listening. The room felt normal again, but that feeling from when I woke up, that something had been off, hadn't gone away completely. When I finally did fall asleep again, it wasn't for long. In the morning, everything looked the same. The room felt normal, the window felt normal, no warmth in the air. I checked the video again, still there, still the same. But when I watched it in daylight, that glow near the window looked slightly closer than I remembered. Not outside, not fully inside either, just near enough that it didn't feel separate from the room anymore. I woke up because my phone screen was lighting up the room. Not fully bright, just enough to notice through half-closed eyes. That soft glow you get when something's left on overnight. I reached over without thinking, expecting to tap it off. But when I picked it up, the camera was open. Front camera. I frowned at that. Still not fully awake. I don't use the camera much, and I definitely hadn't opened it before going to sleep. I tapped the screen. The live view was just my room, dim and grainy in the low light. My face was half in frame, hair a mess, eyes barely open. I closed the app and locked the phone. Then I stopped. Something about it didn't feel right. I unlocked it again and opened the camera roll. The last photo had been taken at 3:12 a.m. I'd gone to bed around midnight. I tapped it. At first it didn't look like much, just a dark image of my room. The angle was wrong. It wasn't taken from where I'd normally hold my phone. It was lower, tilted slightly upward, like it had been held near the edge of the bed. I zoomed in a bit. The bed was in the foreground, my legs under the covers, barely visible. so I had been in bed when it was taken. That part didn't make sense. If I'd taken it myself, I would remember, or at least the phone would have been in my hand when I woke up. But it had been on the nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. I looked closer at the image. The room was dark, but you could make out shapes. The dresser, the door, the window. That's where my focus settled. The window. There was something there. Not clear, and just a faint blur near the glass. I zoomed in more. The image broke apart slightly, pixelated from the low light. But the blur stayed. It wasn't a reflection. It didn't match anything inside the room. It looked separate, like something just beyond the window. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. The room looked normal, exactly like the photo, minus that blur. I turned my head and looked directly at the window. Nothing there. The curtains were half drawn, like I'd left them. No movement outside, no light, just the faint outline of the street beyond. I got out of bed and walked over. The floor was cold under my feet. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out. The street was empty, still. No cars passing, no people, just the same quiet view as always. I leaned closer to the glass. Nothing. I checked the window latch. Locked. I stepped back and looked at the room again. Everything was in place, nothing disturbed. I looked down at the phone again, back at the photo. The blur was still there, in the same spot. I checked the details. 3:12 a.m. No flash. That meant whatever light was in the image had come from somewhere else. I didn't remember waking up at that time. No memory of reaching for the phone. No memory of taking the picture. I scrolled back through the rest of the photos. Nothing unusual before that, just normal stuff from the day before. I went back to the camera app and opened it again, held it the same way as in the photo, tried to match the angle. It was awkward, not how I'd naturally hold it. I took a picture, compared it. Mine looked different. The angle was off, but more than that, the blur wasn't there. I stood there for a bit, just staring at the screen. Then I noticed something else. The time. It said 7:41. That didn't seem right. I was sure I'd woken up earlier than that. It still felt like early morning. I checked the alarm. It had gone off at 7. No memory of it. No memory of turning it off. I checked the phone's usage stats. There was activity around 3:12. The camera had been opened, but nothing else. No other apps, no movement after that until now. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the photo again, zoomed in even further. The blur near the window wasn't random. It had a shape, not clear, but not just noise either. It looked like something had been close to the glass, close enough to distort the image. I stood up again and went back to the window, looked at it from the inside. Then I opened it. Cold air came in. I leaned out slightly and looked at the outside wall. Nothing, no marks, no signs that anything had been there. I closed the window and locked it again. Then I noticed something on the glass. Faint, only visible at a certain angle. A smudge, not like a handprint, more like an uneven patch. I touched it. The glass felt slightly warmer in that spot. Not much, just enough to notice. I pulled my hand back, stood there for a second. Then I went back to the phone, looked at the photo again. That blur was in the same position as the smudge, same height, same area. I sat back down slowly. The room felt normal, too normal, like nothing had happened. But the photo was still there, and I couldn't explain how it was taken, or why the angle didn't match anything I would have done. Later that day, I checked the photo again, zoomed in, tried to make sense of it. The more I looked, the less clear it felt, like my brain couldn't settle on what it was seeing. But one thing stayed consistent. The blur wasn't inside the room. It was on the other side of the glass. And whatever it was, it had been close enough to the window that the camera picked it up before I did. I didn't think anything of it at first. It was Darren from next door who mentioned it just casually while we were both putting bins out. He's not the type to joke about stuff like that, but he's also not someone who exaggerates. He said, "You had lights over your place last night." I laughed a bit and asked what he meant. He shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. Just lights. Hovering. Late. Thought maybe you had a drone or something. I told him I didn't. He frowned slightly, like he'd expected that answer, then just said, "Weird," and went back inside. That should have been the end of it. But I have cameras. Nothing fancy, just a couple pointed at the front drive and the back garden, mostly for peace of mind. So later that morning, I checked. The night had been normal, as far as I remembered. I'd gone to bed around midnight, watched something for a bit, then fallen asleep. Nothing woke me up. I pulled up the footage on my phone, scrolled back to around 1 a.m. since Darren had said it was late. Everything looked normal at first. The front drive, empty. The street beyond, still, no movement. I scrubbed forward slowly. Then I saw it. Not lights, a flicker. The entire frame jumped slightly, like a glitch. Then it skipped. Just a few seconds ahead. I paused it, rewound, played it again. Same thing. The image held steady, then a brief distortion, almost like static. Then the footage jumped forward. I frowned and switched to the back garden camera. Same time, same thing. A flicker. A brief wash across the image, then a skip. I zoomed in slightly, trying to see more detail. The frames during the flicker weren't clear, just broken. Blocks of pixelated light and dark, no defined shapes. I checked the timestamp. There was a gap, maybe 5 seconds missing. I sat there for a second, staring at it. Then I played it again, slower, frame by frame. Right before the flicker, everything looked normal. The garden, fence, shed. Then the image distorted, and for a split second the brightness jumped. Not like a light turning on, more like the exposure had been forced up. Then the corrupted frames, then normal again. But something was off. I couldn't place it at first. Then I noticed the shadows. They didn't line up the same, subtle, but different. I leaned closer to the screen, replayed it again, same result. I checked the front camera again, the same flicker, the same skip. But in one of the corrupted frames, there was something brighter. Not a clear shape, just a patch of white that didn't match anything else in the image. I paused it, tried to isolate the frame. It broke apart when I zoomed in, pixelated, no detail. I sat back and rubbed my face, trying to make sense of it. A glitch. Maybe, some kind of interference, but it happened on both cameras at the same time. I checked the rest of the footage, nothing else like it, just that one moment. I looked at the time again. It didn't match what I expected. I'd gone to bed around midnight. The flicker was just after 1:10, but the footage before and after suggested more time had passed than that. I couldn't quite line it up. I got up and went to the back door, opened it, looked out into the garden. Everything looked normal. Fence, shed, no marks, no signs of anything. I stepped outside. The air felt still, cool, nothing unusual. I stood there for a minute, trying to match what I was seeing to the footage. Nothing stood out. But there was this faint feeling, like the space itself had been disturbed. Not physically, just something not quite settled. I went back inside and checked the footage again, this time focusing on the moment just before the flicker. The plants along the fence moved, not like wind, more like a brief pull. Then the distortion, then the skip, then stillness again. I checked my phone. Signal was fine. Time normal, but I couldn't shake it. I texted Darren, asked what exactly he'd seen. He replied a bit later, said there were 3 lights, soft white, not bright, just hovering above the house, not moving much. Then they were gone. I looked back at the footage. There were no 3 lights, no hovering, just that flicker, that broken stretch of time. I went back to the exact frame where the distortion started, paused it, stared at it. The more I looked, the harder it was to focus on, like my eyes didn't want to settle on that part of the image. I leaned back again. Then I noticed something else. In the frame right after the skip, the camera angle looked slightly different. Not much, just enough that the edge of the fence didn't line up exactly where it should. I checked the live feed. The camera was fixed, no movement, no looseness. I went outside again and looked at it directly. Still secure, still in place. But when I came back in and looked at the footage again, that slight shift was still there. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that, not really doing anything, just thinking. Later that night I checked the cameras again. Everything looked normal, no flickers, no skips. But just before I went to bed, I glanced at the live feed one more time. And for a second, I thought I saw the brightness shift. Not a flash, just a slight change, like something had passed through the frame too quickly to register. Then it was gone. Everything normal again. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I saw anything else, but because I couldn't shake the idea that whatever Darren saw had been there long enough to be visible, but not long enough to be recorded properly. I was already halfway down the street when I noticed the light. It was one of those quiet residential areas where everything looks the same. Two-story houses, small front gardens, cars parked along the curb. I'd gone out late because I couldn't sleep, just needed to walk it off. It was past midnight. Cold, but not freezing. The air felt still, like nothing was moving. I wasn't really paying attention at first, just walking, hands in my pockets, head down. Then I looked up and saw it. A dim light hovering above the row of houses ahead. Not high in the sky, low, just above roof level. At first I thought it was something on one of the houses, a security light or something reflecting oddly. But it wasn't attached to anything. It sat there, separate from the rooftops, like it was suspended. I slowed down without realizing it. The light wasn't bright, more like a soft glow. No flicker, no blinking, just steady. I stopped walking and stood there for a second, trying to figure out what I was looking at. It didn't move, didn't drift, just stayed in place. I glanced around, expecting to see someone else noticing it. No one. All the houses were dark. No lights turning on, no movement at the windows. I looked back at it. Still there. I took a few steps forward. The angle changed slightly, but the light didn't behave like a normal source would. It didn't shift in brightness, didn't reveal any shape. It was just there. I tried to judge how far away it was. It was hard. It looked like it was just above the rooftops, maybe a few meters above them. But something about it felt off, like it wasn't anchored to the houses at all. I kept walking, slower now. As I got closer, I expected it to resolve into something clearer. A drone, maybe, a hovering device. But it didn't. It stayed the same. A soft, contained glow. I stopped again, about halfway down the street. I could see it more clearly now, but not in a helpful way. It didn't have edges, not sharp ones. Just a slightly brighter center and a faint halo around it. No visible structure, no outline. I listened. Nothing. No buzzing, no mechanical noise. Just silence. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual in some spots, but I'd had signal earlier. I looked back up. The light hadn't changed. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in. Not fear, just a sense that something wasn't lining up. I took another step forward. The light seemed to react, not by moving, just by dimming slightly. I stopped again. It held that lower brightness, then returned to its original level. I frowned, trying to make sense of that. I took another step. It dimmed again. I stayed still. It brightened. I didn't like that. It felt like it was responding to me. I took a step back. The light held steady, didn't change. I stayed there for a few seconds, testing it. One step forward. It dimmed. One step back. No change. I felt my chest tighten a bit. I looked around again. Still no one else. The street was completely empty. I looked back up. The light was still there, hovering in the same spot. I noticed something else then. The air felt different. Not colder or warmer. Just stiller. Like the usual background noise had dropped out. Even my own footsteps sounded dull against the pavement. I swallowed and looked at the houses beneath it. Everything looked normal. Windows dark, no movement, no shadows. I looked back at the light. It started to fade. Not quickly, slowly, like someone was turning a dimmer switch. The brightness reduced evenly. No flicker, no shift. Just a gradual decrease. I stayed where I was, watching. The light got dimmer and dimmer, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. No movement, no sudden disappearance, just gone. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space where it had been, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The street felt normal again. I noticed the distant hum of a car somewhere far off, the faint rustle of leaves. My phone buzzed in my hand. Signal had come back. I looked down at it. A notification from earlier. I hadn't heard it come in. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd left the house around 12:20. It now read 1:05. I tried to think back. I hadn't walked that far. The street I was on wasn't long enough to account for that time. I looked back up at the houses. The spot where the light had been looked completely ordinary. Nothing marked it. Nothing left behind. I walked forward, slowly passing underneath where it had hovered. I looked up again. Nothing. Just the dark sky. I kept walking after that. Didn't stop again. When I got home, I stood outside for a minute before going in, looking up at the sky above my own house. Nothing there. Everything felt normal. But when I closed my eyes later, I could still picture where that light had been, and how it hadn't moved. Not once. Just stayed there, until it decided not to be anymore. I was already out on the water when I noticed it. It was early morning, just after sunrise, out on a small lake about 40 minutes from town. Not a popular spot, no cabins, no rentals, just a dirt path down to the shore and a place to launch a small boat if you know where to look. I'd taken my old aluminum boat out, the one with the small motor that barely makes any noise when it's idling. I like that lake because it's quiet. You can sit out there for hours and not see another person. That morning, the air was still. No wind at all. The surface of the water was flat, almost glassy, except for the small ripples from my boat. I'd killed the motor and let myself drift for a bit, cast my line out, just sat there. It was one of those mornings where everything feels slower. I remember looking down into the water at one point, just out of habit. It's usually too dark to see much. The lake's deep in the middle and the water's not that clear. But I noticed something. A faint glow, right beneath the boat. At first, I thought it was just light from the sky reflecting weirdly, but it didn't match the surface. The surface was still. The glow was coming from below. I leaned over the side, trying to get a better look. It wasn't bright, just a soft, dim light, kind of bluish, not flickering, just there. It covered a small area under the boat, maybe a few feet across. I stayed still, watching it. The water itself wasn't disturbed, no ripples, no movement, just that glow sitting beneath me. I pulled my line in slowly, not wanting it hanging there. I don't know why, it just didn't feel right. As I did, I noticed something else. The glow wasn't fixed. It shifted slightly, not like it was following the current, more like it was adjusting its position. I held still. The boat drifted just a bit, barely noticeable. The glow stayed under me for a second. Then it started to move, not randomly, not drifting. It moved in a straight line, away from the boat. Slow at first, then faster. Still completely silent, still not disturbing the surface. I leaned further over the side, trying to follow it with my eyes. The light slid under the water like it was on rails, perfectly straight, no wavering, no turbulence. The surface above it stayed smooth, no wake, nothing. It passed beyond the shadow of the boat and into the open water. I could see it more clearly then, a narrow shape, not round, more like an elongated patch of light. Soft edges, no defined structure. It kept moving, faster now, still straight. I stood up slowly in the boat, trying to keep it in view. My balance shifted slightly and the boat rocked, but the water around the glow didn't react at all. That's what stuck with me. Even with the boat moving, the surface above it stayed untouched. Like whatever was causing the light wasn't interacting with the water the way anything else would. I followed it with my eyes as far as I could. It didn't change direction, didn't slow down, just continued in that same straight path, until it was too faint to see, then it was gone. I stayed standing there for a second, looking at where it had disappeared. The lake looked normal again, flat, still, like nothing had been there. I sat back down slowly. My hands felt colder than they should have. I looked around the lake. No one else out there, no boats, no movement on the shore, just quiet. I picked up my line again, but I didn't cast it right away. I just held it, staring at the water, waiting to see if the glow would come back. It didn't. After a minute or two, I cast the line out again. It landed with a small splash, breaking the surface. The ripples spread out normally. Everything behaved the way it should. But I couldn't shake what I'd just seen. I reeled in slowly after a few minutes. Didn't get a bite. I checked the water again. Nothing. No glow. No movement. Just dark beneath the surface. I stayed out there for another hour. Nothing else happened. No strange lights. No changes. Just the usual. When I finally started the motor and headed back to shore, I kept glancing over the side, half expecting to see that glow again, but the water stayed the same. Later that day, I thought about what it could have been. Some kind of reflection, maybe. But the way it moved didn't match that. And the way it didn't disturb the water at all. That didn't match anything I knew. A few days later, I went back to the same spot, same time of morning, same conditions. The water looked normal. I drifted in the same area for a while. Nothing happened. But at one point, I leaned over the side again, looking down, and for a second, I had this strange feeling, like there was something under there, not moving, just there, watching from below the surface. I straightened up and sat back, didn't lean over again after that. The rest of the day was normal, but I didn't stay as long as I usually do, and I haven't gone back out there alone since. I was sitting by the fire when everything went quiet. Not gradually, all at once. 1 second there were insects, constant, layered noise like there always is in the woods at night, and then nothing. It cut off so clean it felt wrong. I remember looking up immediately, like I expected to see something that caused it. There was nothing, just trees, shadows, and the fire in front of me. I was camping alone, about an hour hike in from the nearest road. It was a spot my friend Jonah had shown me a couple of years back. Small clearing, decent ground for a tent, and far enough out that you don't get anyone passing through. I'd gotten there in the late afternoon, set everything up, and had a fire going by sunset. Everything had been normal, quiet, but in the usual way. That constant background of insects, occasional rustle in the trees, the kind of noise you stop noticing after a while, until it stopped. I sat there, staring into the fire for a second, trying to process it. Then I became aware of how loud the silence was. Not just quiet, empty. I turned my head slowly, listening. No insects, no wind. Even the leaves seemed still. The fire popped once and it sounded too sharp, too clear. I stood up without really thinking, looked around the edge of the clearing. Nothing moved. The trees stood dark and still, branches barely visible against the sky. I took a few steps away from the fire, trying to listen deeper into the woods. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the temperature. It had dropped. Not drastically, but enough that I felt it immediately, like stepping into shade after being in the sun, except it was night. I rubbed my arms without thinking. Then I heard something, not a sound exactly, more like a shift. I turned toward it, to the right side of the clearing where the trees were closer together. At first, I didn't see anything. Then something moved, not like an animal. It wasn't solid, it was more like the air itself had shifted. A faint shimmer, like heat haze, but in the dark. It passed between two trees, not quickly, just smoothly. I stared at it, trying to focus. It didn't have a clear shape, just a distortion, like something bending the space around it. I took a step back toward the fire. The shimmer moved again, still between the trees, slightly further in now. I couldn't hear it. No footsteps, no branches snapping, nothing. Just that movement. The silence around me pressed in harder. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. The fire crackled behind me, but it felt distant, like it wasn't part of the same space. I took another step back. The shimmer paused, not stopped, just less noticeable, like it was blending in. Then it moved again. This time, slightly closer to the edge of the clearing, still not entering it, just staying between the trees. I tried to tell myself it was just my eyes adjusting, light from the fire playing tricks, but the way it moved didn't match that. It had direction. I backed up another step, closer to the fire now. The warmth hit me again, but it didn't feel as strong as it should have. The shimmer faded slightly, not gone, just harder to see. I kept my eyes on that spot, waiting. Nothing moved for a few seconds. Then it passed again, from left to right this time. Slightly higher, like it had shifted position without me noticing. I felt that tightness in my chest again. Not panic, just that sense that something wasn't right. I looked around the rest of the clearing. Everything else was still, no movement anywhere, no sound. I looked back. The shimmer was gone, completely. The space between the trees looked normal again. Again. Dark. Empty. I stayed there, watching, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Then, slowly, the insects started again. Not all at once. A few at first. Then, more, until the normal noise filled the space again, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while longer, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Eventually, I sat back down by the fire, kept glancing up, checking the tree line. Nothing moved, everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence had been too complete, the movement too deliberate. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I'd missed something. At one point, maybe an hour later, the insects stopped again. Briefly, just for a few seconds. I opened my eyes immediately, sat up, listened. Nothing. Then they started again. I didn't see the shimmer that time, but I didn't relax. When morning came, everything felt normal again. The woods sounded like they should. Birds, insects, wind through the trees. I packed up early, didn't stay as long as I planned. On the hike back, I kept looking off into the trees, half expecting to see that distortion again. But I didn't. Everything looked solid, clear, normal. I've been back to that spot once since, with Jonah. During the day, nothing unusual happened, but I noticed something. The area where I'd seen the shimmer, the trees there felt different. Not visibly, just in the way the space between them looked. Like my eyes didn't settle on it the same way. I didn't mention it. We stayed for a few hours and left before it got dark. I haven't gone back at night since, and sometimes when it gets really quiet outside, I notice how much sound is usually there and how wrong it felt when it wasn't. I was on the back road that cuts between two stretches of farmland when I saw it. It was late, just after 10, I think. I'd left Gareth's place a bit later than I planned, and instead of taking the main road, I cut through the fields like I usually do. It's faster, but there's nothing out there. No houses close to the road, no street lights. Just long stretches of open land and the occasional gate or fence line. The sky was clear, but there wasn't much moonlight. My headlights were doing most of the work. I was about halfway through when I noticed a glow off to the left. At first, I thought it was a farmhouse light, something low and warm, just above the ground. But as I drove a little closer, I realized it wasn't where any building should be. It was in the field itself. I slowed down a bit, easing off the accelerator. The glow wasn't bright. Soft, almost dull, like a light behind frosted glass. It hovered maybe a couple of feet above the ground, not touching anything, and it didn't light up the field around it. That's what caught my attention. The grass should have been illuminated, even faintly. But it wasn't. The ground stayed dark. Only the glow itself was visible. I slowed down more, maybe down to 30. The road there runs parallel to the field for a while, so I had a clear view of it. The glow didn't flicker, didn't move side to side, just stayed there. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. No shape, no edges, just a contained patch of light. I remember thinking maybe it was something reflective catching my headlights, but the angle didn't make sense, and it stayed steady as I moved. If it were a reflection, it would have shifted or disappeared. This didn't. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air came in, but there was no sound. No machinery, no wind, nothing. Just silence. I kept driving slowly. The glow stayed in the same spot in the field. Then, without any warning, it moved. Not across the ground, up, straight up. It lifted in a clean vertical line. No tilt, no wobble, just rose. I instinctively slowed down even more, almost to a crawl. My headlights stayed fixed on the road, but I could still see it in my peripheral vision. It didn't leave a trail, didn't cast light on anything as it went up. It just moved, fast enough to notice, but not so fast that I couldn't track it. Within a second or two, it was higher than the fence posts, then higher than the trees further back. Still no change in brightness, still no illumination of anything around it, just that same soft glow, now suspended in the air. Then it stopped. For a brief moment, it hung there, perfectly still. I held my breath without realizing it. Then it went out, not like a light turning off, more like it dimmed evenly until it wasn't there anymore. No fade trail, no afterimage, just gone. I stopped the car completely, sat there in the middle of the road, engine idling, staring at the spot where it had been. Nothing, just empty sky. I glanced at the field again. The ground was dark, no sign of anything that had been there. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else, another car, anything. Nothing. The road behind me was empty. The road ahead was empty. I stayed there for maybe 20 seconds, just watching, waiting. Nothing came back. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it felt more noticeable now. I looked back at the sky, trying to see if there was any hint of where it had gone. Nothing. Just stars. I pulled the car forward slowly. As I passed the section of the field where the glow had been, I turned my head slightly, trying to get a better look. The ground looked normal. No marks, no disturbance, just grass. I kept driving, but slower than before. Every few seconds I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me. No lights, no movement. After a minute or two, I realized the radio had gone quiet. Not static, just silent. I reached over and adjusted the volume. Nothing changed. I switched stations. Still nothing. I turned it off. The silence felt heavier now, like it was pressing in. I kept driving. The road stretched out ahead, same as always, but it didn't feel the same. Then I noticed the time. I'd left Gareth's at 9:50. The drive should have taken maybe 20 minutes. The clock on the dashboard read 10:35. That didn't make sense. I hadn't stopped anywhere. I hadn't taken a wrong turn. I looked back at the road behind me. Nothing there. Just darkness. I focused back on the road ahead. The headlights looked normal again, reaching as far as they should. No more strange glow, no more movement. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a second, engine still running. I looked up at the sky one more time. Nothing. Everything looked normal. I turned the engine off and got out. The air felt still again, but in a normal way. I locked the car and went inside. Later that night, I kept thinking about how the light moved. Not drifting, not flying, just lifting, straight up, and how it didn't light anything around it. Like it wasn't really there in the same way other lights are. I noticed it while I was sitting on the couch, not doing anything important. It was late afternoon, maybe around 5:30. The sky had that dull, overcast look, and the house felt quieter than usual. Not silent, flat. At first, I thought it was coming from somewhere outside, a low hum, not loud enough to be a sound you could point to, but present. The weird part was how it felt. It wasn't something I was hearing clearly. It was more like pressure, like when your ears pop on a plane, except it didn't release. It just stayed there. I paused what I was watching and sat still, trying to focus on it. The hum didn't change, didn't rise or fall, just held steady. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, thinking maybe it was the fridge or something electrical. But the closer I got to the appliances, the less sense it made. It didn't get louder, didn't shift direction. It felt exactly the same no matter where I stood. I opened the fridge, normal. Closed it again, the hum was still there. I turned the extractor fan on briefly just to compare. That had a clear sound, a direction. The hum didn't. I turned the fan off, the pressure stayed. I rubbed my ears a bit, thinking maybe it was something physical, but it didn't change. I swallowed, tried to equalize it. Nothing. It was just there, steady. I walked into the hallway, same thing, into the bedroom, no change. It didn't matter where I went. It felt like it was inside the space, not coming from any one point. I grabbed my phone and checked if I'd missed something, maybe a notification or an alert. Nothing. No signal issues. No messages. I went back into the living room and stood still again. The hum continued. If anything, I noticed it more when I wasn't moving, like it filled the silence. I tried to ignore it for a bit. Sat back down, turned the TV on again, but once I'd noticed it, I couldn't not notice it. It sat there behind everything. Constant. Then I realized something else. My ears felt full, not blocked exactly, just pressurized, like there was a slight weight behind them. I stood up again, more unsettled now. I went to the front door, stood there for a second, hand on the handle. The hum was still there. I opened the door. The moment I stepped outside, it stopped, completely. No fade, no reduction, just gone. I stood there on the step, blinking. The outside air felt normal, cool, slightly damp. I could hear distant traffic, a bird somewhere, leaves moving faintly. Everything sounded right. I stepped back inside. The hum came back immediately. Same intensity, same pressure. I froze just inside the doorway. Then I stepped out again. Gone. Back in. There. I repeated it a couple of times, slower. Each time, the same result. Pressure. Outside. Nothing. I stood just at the threshold for a few seconds. 1 foot inside, 1 foot out. I could feel the difference. Subtle but real, like crossing an invisible line. I stepped fully inside again. The hum settled back in. I closed the door slowly. The house felt wrong now. Not visibly, everything looked exactly the same, but the space felt different, like it wasn't just empty air anymore. I walked back into the living room. The hum didn't change, didn't follow me. It was just everywhere. I turned off the TV again. Stood there, listening, feeling. I checked the windows, all closed. I opened one, leaned out slightly. Outside, normal. No hum. I stepped back, still there. I closed the window. The pressure didn't change. I checked the time, 5:47. That seemed fine. I looked around the room again. Nothing out of place. I picked up my keys without really deciding to. Went back to the door, opened it, stepped outside. The hum vanished again. I stood there for a bit longer this time, breathing, listening. Everything outside felt normal, balanced. I stepped back inside. The hum returned instantly. That's when I decided to leave. I didn't grab anything else, just my keys and my phone. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The silence outside felt heavier now, but in a normal way, grounded. I walked to my car and got in, sat there for a minute. No hum, no pressure, just the usual quiet. I started the engine. The sound felt normal, clear. I drove around for a bit, not really going anywhere, just staying out. After maybe 20 minutes, I went back, parked outside, sat there looking at the house. Nothing looked different. Lights were off inside, everything as I'd left it. I got out and walked up to the door, paused for a second, then opened it. The hum was gone, completely. I stepped inside slowly, listened. Nothing. The house felt normal again. I closed the door behind me, waited. No pressure, no sound. I walked through the rooms again. Everything was the same, no signs of anything unusual. I checked the time, 6:22. That didn't feel right. It felt like I'd been out longer than that. I tried to piece it together, how long I'd been inside before leaving, how long I'd driven. It didn't add up cleanly. I went back into the living room and sat down. The space felt empty again, like it should. But every now and then, I catch myself pausing, waiting for that pressure to come back, and wondering if it was something in the house, or something that only existed while I was inside it. I saw it because it wasn't lighting anything. I'd just turned onto my street, maybe a couple of minutes from my place. It was late, around 11:45, and the road was quiet. Most of the houses had their lights off, and there weren't many cars parked along the curb. I wasn't really paying attention at first. Just walking, hands in my pockets, head slightly down. Then something caught my eye. A light. Low. Just above one of the parked cars ahead. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Maybe from a window or a passing car I hadn't noticed, but there were no cars, and the light didn't move. I slowed down slightly, looking straight at it. It hovered just above the roof of the car, not touching it, maybe a foot or two above. It wasn't bright, more like a soft glow, kind of dull but clear enough to see, and it didn't flicker, just stayed steady. I kept walking, slower now, trying to figure out what it was. A drone, maybe. But there was no sound, no buzzing, nothing. I glanced around the street, no one else out, no open doors, no movement in any of the houses. I looked back at the light, still there, still hovering. I got closer, close enough to see the car clearly now. It was a dark-colored hatchback. I've seen it there before. Nothing unusual about it, except for the light above it. That's when I noticed something else. There was no shadow. The light should have cast something onto the car, or the ground. But it didn't. The roof stayed dark, the pavement stayed dark. The light didn't reflect off anything. It just existed. I stopped walking, stood there, watching it. It didn't react, didn't move, didn't change brightness, just stayed in place. I took a step forward. The light didn't shift, didn't adjust. It stayed fixed in the same spot above the car. I looked at the windows of the houses nearby. No reflections there either. It wasn't lighting anything. That's what made it feel wrong. I moved closer, within a few feet now. I could see the edges of it more clearly, or at least I thought I could. It didn't have a sharp outline, more like a faint boundary, like the air was slightly brighter in that spot. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The light didn't change, didn't react. I could feel my breathing slow down without meaning to. The street felt quieter, like the usual background noise had dropped out. I glanced behind me. The road was empty. Then I looked back at the light. It seemed slightly dimmer, not by much, just enough to notice. I took another step closer. The air felt different, not colder, just heavier, like there was a subtle pressure. I swallowed. My ears popped slightly. I froze for a second. Then I looked back at the light. It pulsed, once, very faint, a slight increase in brightness, then back down. At the same time, the pressure peaked, then eased. I felt that tightness in my chest again. Not fear, just confusion. I stood there, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to reach out, touch it. But something about that didn't feel right. I stayed where I was, watching. The light dimmed again, gradually, like it was fading. Still no shadow, still no reflection, just that same contained glow. It got weaker, fainter, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. No movement, no upward motion, no drift, just gone. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space above the car, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The street felt normal again. The distant hum of traffic returned. A faint breeze moved through. I stepped closer to the car, looked at the roof. Nothing there. No marks. No sign anything had been above it. I looked at the ground. Same thing, just pavement. I stepped back, looked up. Nothing. No light. No movement. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't usual for that spot. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been standing there for a minute or two. The phone said it had been nearly 15. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Then the signal came back. Full bars, like nothing had happened. I looked at the car one more time. Everything about it looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the light hadn't been sitting above it. It had been sitting in that space. Like it wasn't interacting with anything around it, just occupying a spot where nothing else did. I walked the rest of the way home, kept glancing back once or twice, nothing there. When I got inside, I stood by the window for a minute, looking out at the street. Everything looked normal. But that spot right above that car felt like it had been used for something, even though nothing had touched it. I saw it because the light hit it just right. I was driving back from a late shift, taking a stretch of road I don't usually use. It cuts across open farmland, no streetlights, just long, straight sections with nothing on either side except low fences and fields. It was around 2 a.m., cold, clear, no wind. The road was empty. I had the headlights on full beam, just letting them stretch out ahead. That's when I caught the reflection. At first, it was just a flicker, a quick glint somewhere above the road. I thought maybe it was a sign, something reflective catching the light at an odd angle. But it wasn't where a sign would be. It was too high. I slowed down a bit, easing off the accelerator. The reflection came again, sharper this time, a dull metallic sheen. Not bright like a mirror, more like something smooth that absorbed some of the light and reflected the rest. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The road ahead was completely empty. No poles, no wires, nothing hanging above it, but the reflection was there. I saw it again, a brief flash, then nothing, then another, like something was shifting slightly, just enough for the headlights to catch it. I slowed down more, down to maybe 35. My grip on the wheel tightened without me realizing it. The reflection came again, longer this time. And I saw the shape, not clearly, just enough to tell it wasn't flat, it was curved, smooth, like the underside of something rounded. No edges I could define, no lights of its own, just that dull surface catching my headlights. I kept moving forward slowly. The angle changed, the reflection slid across it. For a second, the shape became more visible. It wasn't small, it stretched wider than the road. Not massive, but bigger than any drone, bigger than anything that should be just sitting there. And it wasn't moving, it just hung there, perfectly still. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just the sense that what I was looking at didn't make sense. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air rushed in, no sound, no engine noise from above, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I looked back up. The reflection came again. This time it revealed more of the curve like a shallow arc, smooth all the way across. No seams, no structure I could recognize. Then it tilted, just slightly. A small rotation. Enough that the reflection shifted across it. And then it was gone. Not like it moved away, not like it drifted or sped off. It just went straight up. Instantly. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No blur, no trail, no sound. Just empty sky. I flinched and hit the brake harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing. Just stars. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, turning slowly, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement. No light. No sign anything had been there. I listened. No sound. Even the usual background noise felt absent, like everything had been muted. I stood there for maybe half a minute, just staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal. No warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it a few minutes before. It had been 2:07. Now it read 2:21. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the tilt. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again. Slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No reflections, no shapes. Just empty. I kept glancing up through the windshield. Nothing. No sign of anything above me. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more strange lights, No missing time I could notice, just the usual road. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine running. I adjusted the rearview mirror without thinking. It felt slightly off, like it wasn't quite aligned the way it should be. I fixed it, or tried to, but it never felt exactly right. I turned the engine off and got out. The air felt normal again. The quiet sounded normal. I looked up one last time. Nothing. Just the night sky. But the image of that shape stayed with me, the way it didn't move like anything I knew, and how it didn't leave. It just stopped being there, like it had only existed while my headlights were on it. I noticed it with my eyes closed. I'd been lying there for a while, not really asleep, just drifting in that half-awake state. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get late at night when everything settles. Then the light started. At first I thought it was just my imagination, a faint brightness behind my eyelids. Not sudden, gradual, like distant lightning, but without the sharp flashes. It built slowly, even. No flicker, just a steady increase in brightness. I kept my eyes closed, watching it, trying to figure out if it was coming from outside, but it didn't feel directional. It felt like it was everywhere at once, behind everything. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark, exactly how it should have been. No light coming through the curtains. No glow from anything, just darkness. I blinked a few times, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing changed. I lay there for a second, waiting. Then I closed my eyes again. The light came back immediately, already there, brighter than before. I felt a slight tension in my chest. Not fear, just confusion. I kept my eyes closed this time, watching it build. It didn't pulse, didn't shift, just grew steadily, like something approaching far away. I tried to listen. There was a faint ringing. At first, I thought it was just the usual background noise in your ears, but it got louder. Not sharp, more like a high, steady tone. I opened my eyes again. Dark, no change. The ringing stayed. I pushed myself up slightly, resting on my elbows. The room looked normal. The door was closed. The window was the same. Nothing out of place. I checked the clock on my bedside table. The numbers were dim but visible. 2:43. I was sure it had been earlier than that when I last checked. I lay back down slowly. The ringing stayed in my ears. I closed my eyes again. The light was stronger now. Not blinding, but bright enough that it felt wrong, like my eyes should have been seeing it even when open. I focused on it, trying to find a source, a direction. There wasn't one. It was flat, even, everywhere. The ringing got louder. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't change. I felt pressure building in my ears, like when you change altitude too quickly. I opened my eyes. Dark. Still nothing. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The bulb flickered once, then came on. The light felt normal, warm, contained. Nothing like what I'd been seeing. The ringing didn't stop. I sat up fully this time, looked around the room. Everything was where it should be. Nothing moved, nothing out of place. I turned the lamp off again. Darkness returned. I lay back down, closed my eyes. The light was still there at full brightness now, holding steady. The ringing peaked, a sharp, steady tone that filled my head. I winced slightly. Then all at once, it stopped. The light vanished, the ringing cut off. No fade, no transition, just gone. I opened my eyes. Dark, silent, everything normal. I sat there for a second, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I checked the clock again. 3:01. That didn't make sense. I was sure only a few minutes had passed. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor felt colder than before. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside was still, no lights, no movement, just the empty street. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something. The room felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, just empty, like something had been there before and wasn't now. I stood there for a minute, listening. Slowly, the normal background noise returned. Faint, barely noticeable, but there. I went back to bed and lay down. Didn't close my eyes right away. When I finally did, there was nothing. No light, no ringing, just darkness. I fell asleep eventually. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same. Nothing out of place. But when I thought back to it, I couldn't remember exactly when the light had been the brightest. Just that it had reached something, and I hadn't seen it with my eyes open. I only noticed it because I'd been staring at the same part of the sky for too long. It was one of those nights where you go out just to clear your head. I'd driven out past the last row of houses, parked near a field gate, and sat on the hood of my car with the engine off. No lights nearby, no noise, just the sky. I do that sometimes. Not for anything specific, just to sit and not think about anything for a while. After a bit, your eyes adjust and you start picking out the same patterns. I'm not into astronomy or anything, but I recognize a few shapes. That's what I was doing. Looking at one particular patch of sky just above the tree line. At first, everything looked normal. Stars steady, no movement, then one of them dimmed. Not disappeared, just softened. I frowned slightly, thinking maybe a thin cloud had passed over it, but the rest of the stars around it didn't change. Just that one. I kept looking. It brightened again. Back to where it had been, then dimmed, slow, even, like a steady rhythm. I sat up a bit, resting my elbows on my knees, focused on it. The moment I did, it stopped. Just a normal star again, no change. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. I looked away for a second, then back. It stayed steady. I leaned back again, relaxing, tried not to stare directly at it, just watched the area. After a few seconds, it started again, that same slow dimming, then brightening. I felt that quiet tension start to build. Not fear, just confusion. I shifted slightly, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision. It kept pulsing, steady, like it wasn't random. I leaned forward again, focused on it directly. It stopped, completely stable. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked away again, let my eyes drift across the sky, then back toward it. The pulsing resumed. I rubbed my face slightly, trying to stay grounded. Maybe it was something in my eyes, or the way I was focusing, but it didn't feel like that. It felt separate, like it was doing it on its own. I checked my phone out of habit, no signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back up. The star was pulsing again, slow, consistent. I decided to test it. I fixed my gaze just to the side of it, not directly on it. It kept pulsing. I shifted my eyes directly onto it. It stopped, perfectly steady. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, barely noticeable, like a change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I looked away again. The pulsing resumed. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Still not fear, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I leaned back on the hood of the car again, tried to relax, watched the sky without focusing too hard. The pulsing continued. Then something else changed. The stars around it looked slightly off, not moving, just positioned differently. Like the pattern had shifted by a fraction. I blinked, focused on the area. Everything snapped back to normal. I looked away again. The pulsing continued. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 15 minutes. The phone said it had been nearly 40. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back up. The star was still pulsing, unchanged. I felt that pressure in my ears again, slightly stronger. Then I noticed something else. The air felt quieter, not silent, just muted, like the usual distant sounds had dropped out. I sat up slowly, looked around. Nothing had changed on the ground. The field was still, the road was empty. I looked back up. The star pulsed again. Then I focused on it directly. It stopped. I kept my gaze fixed on it this time, waiting. It didn't change, just a normal star. I held my focus there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I looked away. The moment I did, it resumed, that same steady rhythm. I stood up from the car. The metal creaked slightly under me, louder than it should have been. I kept my eyes on the sky, but not directly on that star. It kept pulsing. I felt the pressure in my ears peak, then ease. I looked directly at the star again. It stopped. I stayed there, staring at it, trying to force it to move. It didn't, just a fixed point of light. I looked away one last time. It pulsed again. Then slowly, it stopped on its own. Not because I looked at it. It just settled back into a normal, steady brightness. I waited, watched. Nothing changed. It stayed stable. I checked the time again. It didn't match. More time had passed than it should have. I stood there for a few seconds longer. Then I got back in the car, sat there with the engine off, looking up through the windshield. The sky looked normal, every star steady, no pulsing, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't stopped because it was done. It had stopped because I'd noticed it. I saw it just as I came out of the dip in the road. That stretch runs between two wide fields, nothing but low crops on either side and a few distant barns set way back from the road. No streetlights, no houses close by, just long, flat land. and sky. It was late, maybe around 1:30 a.m. I'd been driving for a while already, just heading home after dropping off my friend Callum. The road was empty, no other headlights, no movement anywhere. I had my full beams on, letting them stretch as far as they could. That's when I noticed the glow. Off to the right, low, just above the crops. At first I thought it was a farmhouse light, something distant, but it didn't sit right. It wasn't anchored to anything. It hovered just above the tops of the plants, maybe a couple of feet up. I slowed down without thinking. The glow wasn't bright, more like a soft white patch, even. No flicker, just there. I glanced around, trying to find a source. There were no buildings close enough, nothing that could be casting light that low and that contained. I looked back at it, still hovering. I eased off the accelerator more, down to maybe 40. As I got closer, I expected it to illuminate the ground, even faintly, but it didn't. The crops beneath it stayed dark, no shadows, no reflection. The light didn't interact with anything around it. It just existed. I leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to make out a shape. There wasn't one, just a soft, contained glow. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air rushed in, no sound, no hum, no movement. The field was completely still. I kept driving slowly. The glow stayed in the same spot, not drifting, not shifting, just hovering. Then it moved, straight up, no hesitation, no buildup, just lifted, perfectly vertical. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. I slowed even more, almost crawling now. The glow rose above the crops, above the fence line. Still the same brightness, no change. It didn't leave a trail, didn't scatter light, it just moved upward. Clean, silent. I watched it through the passenger window as I drove. It kept going, higher, still no change in brightness, still no illumination of anything around it. I craned my neck slightly, trying to keep it in view. The angle shifted as I passed it. Now it was above me, or at least it felt that way. I slowed to almost a stop. The car crept forward. The glow continued upward. Then it stopped. For a second it just hung there, high above the field, still. Then it vanished, not dimmed, not faded, just gone. I stopped the car completely, sat there in the middle of the road, staring up. Nothing, just the sky. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing, no movement, no light, no sound. I turned slowly, looking across the fields. Everything was dark, flat, normal. I listened. Nothing. Even the usual distant noise felt gone, like everything had been muted. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, waiting. Nothing happened. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal, no warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it not long before. It had been around 1:32. Now it read 1:48. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The glow, the movement. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I started driving again, slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No more lights, no more movement, just empty fields. I kept glancing over to the right, half expecting to see something again. Nothing. The rest of the drive passed without anything unusual. When I got home, I parked and sat there for a minute, engine off. Looking out through the windshield, everything felt normal again. The quiet sounded right, the air felt right, but that glow stayed in my head. The way it didn't light anything, didn't touch anything. It just moved through the space, like it wasn't part of it at all. I noticed it because the water didn't move. I'd been sitting there for a while, lying in the water, not expecting much. It was one of those quiet spots along the river where you don't get much traffic, especially at night. My brother Daniel had told me about it a while back, said it was a good place if you didn't mind the walk. So I'd parked up the road, hiked down with my gear, and set up near the edge where the bank flattened out a bit. It was late, maybe around 11:30. No wind, no sound except the occasional soft movement of water against the bank. I had a small lantern behind me, not bright, just enough to see what I was doing. Everything else was dark. I'd been staring at the water for a while, just watching the surface when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a thin line of light under the surface. Faint, barely noticeable. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The beam was narrow, straight, and it wasn't on the surface. It was beneath it. A few inches down, maybe? I frowned, thinking maybe someone upstream had a flashlight or something, but the beam didn't spread, didn't scatter. It stayed tight, like a line drawn through the water. I looked around, no one else there, no other lights, no movement along the banks. I looked back at the water. The beam was still there, and it was moving. Slowly at first, then steadier, in a perfectly straight line, parallel to the bank. I leaned closer, resting my hand on the ground to steady myself. The water above it didn't ripple, didn't distort. It was like the beam existed separately from the surface. I watched it move, no wavering, no bending, just a straight, controlled path. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in. Not fear, just confusion. I picked up my rod slightly, not taking my eyes off the water. The line didn't move. Nothing tugged. Everything else stayed still. The beam continued its path. Then it stopped, completely still, just sitting there beneath the surface. I held my breath without realizing it, waiting. The beam didn't flicker, didn't dim, just stayed exactly the same. Then it moved again, faster this time, still perfectly straight, cutting through the water without disturbing it. I followed it with my eyes. It reached a point further down the bank. Then it was gone. No fade, no ripple. No change in the water at all. Just gone. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The water returned to looking exactly the same as before. Dark. Still. I exhaled slowly, then leaned back slightly, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it had been something in the water, a reflection from something distant. But it hadn't behaved like that. It hadn't spread, hadn't distorted. I glanced at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it still stood out. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes. The phone said it had been over an hour. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the water. Still nothing. I picked up my rod again, adjusted the line slightly. Everything felt normal. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then I saw it again, further out this time, the same narrow beam, under the surface, perfectly straight. I froze, didn't move. The beam held still for a second, then began to move, slower than before, but still controlled, still precise. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I watched it carefully, trying to see what was causing it, but there was nothing visible around it. No source, no object, just the light itself. It passed directly in front of where my line entered the water. Didn't affect it, didn't bend it, just passed through. I swallowed. The air felt heavier, subtle, like pressure building. The beam stopped again, this time closer to me, maybe 10 feet out. I could see it more clearly now. The edges weren't sharp, but they weren't blurred either, just contained, like the water around it wasn't interacting with it properly. I leaned forward slightly. The beam didn't react. Then it moved again, straight toward the middle of the river. Faster now. No change in brightness, no change in direction. Just a clean, straight path, then gone. I sat there for a long moment, not moving, not thinking, just listening. The water sounded normal again. Soft, consistent. I looked around. Nothing. No lights, no movement. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time had jumped again. More than it should have. More than it should have. I packed up slowly after that. Didn't rush, but didn't stay either. As I walked back up the bank, I kept glancing back at the water. Nothing. Just the dark surface. But the thing that stuck with me was how the light had moved. Not like something in water. Not like anything carried by it. It moved like the water wasn't even there. Like it was passing through something else entirely. I noticed it because the timestamp didn't line up. It was early morning when I checked the footage. I have a habit of scrolling through it while I drink coffee, just to make sure nothing weird happened overnight. It's a small setup, one camera pointed at the back garden, another at the front drive. Nothing ever really shows up. That morning started the same way. I scrubbed through the timeline, half paying attention. Empty yard, fence, shed. A bit of wind moving the plants. Normal. Then the screen went white. Not faded, not overexposed gradually. Just white. Like the entire frame had been filled at once. It lasted for maybe a fraction of a second. Then everything went back to normal. I paused it, rewound, played it again. Same thing. The yard was there, then a full white frame, then the yard again. I checked the timestamp. That's when I saw the gap. It jumped forward. Not by much. Maybe 4 or 5 seconds. But it skipped. Cleanly. No intermediate frames. I leaned closer to the screen, rewound again, played it slower this time, frame by frame. The moment before the flash looked normal, then the white frame, then the next frame, the yard again. But something about it felt slightly off. I couldn't place it at first. I played it again. Then I noticed the angle looked slightly different, not dramatically, just enough that the fence line didn't sit exactly where it should, like the camera had shifted, but it hadn't. I checked the live feed, the camera was in the same place, same angle, nothing moved. I went back to the footage, played it again, the white frame, the skip, then the yard, still, quiet. I sat there for a minute staring at it. Then I checked the rest of the night. Everything else looked normal, no other flashes, no glitches, just that one moment. I got up and went to the back door, opened it slightly, looked out. The yard looked the same as it did in the footage. Fence, shed, nothing out of place. I stepped outside. The air was cool, still, no wind. I stood there for a second, trying to match what I was seeing to the footage. Nothing felt wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened there, in that space. I went back inside and watched the clip again. This time, I paid attention to the seconds before the flash. The plants were still, no movement. Then, right before the white frame, they shifted. Not from wind, more like a slight pull, as if something had passed over them. I replayed it, watched closely. Same thing. A subtle movement. Then the flash, then the skip, then stillness again. I checked the timestamp once more. The gap was consistent, always the same jump. I scrubbed forward a bit. Everything after looked normal, until I noticed something else. The lighting. It didn't match perfectly. The yard looked slightly darker than it had before the flash. Not by much, just enough to notice. I leaned back in my chair, looked away from the screen for a second, then back. The image felt harder to focus on, like my eyes didn't want to settle on that part. I blinked a few times, then watched it again. White. Skip. Normal, but not quite. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes. The phone said it had been closer to 25. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Then I went back to the footage again. Paused it on the frame right after the flash. Zoomed in, the image broke apart slightly, pixelated, but something stood out, near the center of the yard. A faint outline. Not clear, not defined, just a slight distortion, like the space itself hadn't settled properly yet. I leaned closer, tried to focus on it. The more I looked, the harder it was to see, like it slipped out of focus the moment I tried to define it. I sat back again, let my eyes relax. The shape seemed more visible when I wasn't looking directly at it. Then I looked at the timestamp again. That gap. Those missing seconds. I tried to imagine what could have caused it. A glitch, a power surge, something interfering with the camera. But none of that explained the way the frame went completely white, or the way the yard looked slightly different after. I stood up and went back to the door, opened it again, stepped outside. The yard looked normal. But the air felt slightly off, not colder, not warmer, just different, like there was less of it. I walked a few steps out, stopped roughly where that distortion had been in the footage. Nothing there, no marks, no signs of anything. I stood still, listening. The usual background noise felt muted, faint, distant. I looked up. The sky was clear. Nothing unusual. I looked back down at the ground, then around the yard. Everything looked exactly the same. But I couldn't shake the feeling that those missing seconds hadn't been empty. They just hadn't been recorded. And whatever filled them had left the space slightly out of place when it was done. I saw them before I realized how high they were. The road had been foggy for a while, that thick kind where your headlights just push into it and don't really reach anything beyond a short distance. I was driving slow, maybe 30, just following the faint line of the road and keeping an eye on the verge. It was late, just after midnight, no traffic. I hadn't passed another car in at least 15 minutes. The fog wasn't moving much either. It just sat there, heavy and still. Then I saw the lights, 2 of them. Faint at first, just a dull glow ahead. I assumed it was another car coming the other way, still some distance off. I eased my foot off the accelerator a bit, expecting them to grow brighter as they approached. They didn't. They stayed the same. Same brightness, same distance. I squinted, trying to make out the shape around them. Nothing. Just the lights. I kept driving forward slowly. The fog shifted slightly as I moved, thinning in patches. The lights stayed fixed. That's when I noticed something off. They weren't aligned with the road, they were too high. At first, I thought it was just the angle, like maybe the road dipped and they were cresting a hill, but there wasn't a hill there. I knew that stretch. Flat, open, no elevation change like that. I slowed down more, down to maybe 20. The lights stayed in place, still not getting brighter, still not moving closer. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see past the glare. There was no silhouette, no outline of a vehicle, just those 2 points of light. I rolled the window down a crack, cold air slipped in, no sound, no engine noise, no tire noise, nothing. I looked back at the lights. The fog thinned for a second, and I saw it clearly. They weren't just slightly elevated, they were far above the road, higher than any vehicle could be. At least 20 feet up, maybe more. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear. Just confusion. I slowed almost to a stop. The car crept forward. The lights didn't move. They didn't shift position. They just hung there, perfectly still. I checked the edges of the fog around them. No structure, no cables, no anything, just open air. I glanced at the side of the road. The field stretched out flat on both sides. Nothing that could support lights at that height. Looked back at them. Still there, unchanged. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, watching, waiting for something to make sense. Then the fog shifted again. A thicker patch rolled through. The lights dimmed slightly as it passed in front of them, then reappeared. Same position, same brightness. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like altitude change. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I reached for my phone without taking my eyes off the lights. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back up. The lights flickered just once. Very faint. Then steadied again. I took a slow breath. Then the fog began to thin. More noticeably this time. The air ahead cleared in a widening patch. The road became visible. Empty. Completely empty. And the lights were gone. Not fading, not moving away. Just gone. The space where they had been was clear. Nothing there. No vehicle, no structure, no explanation. I sat there for a second, staring at the empty air, waiting. Nothing came back. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The fog continued to thin, drifting away in slow patches. I looked up. Nothing. Just the dark sky above. I looked down the road. Empty. No headlights in either direction. I listened. No sound. No distant engine. No movement. I turned slowly, scanning the fields. Nothing. Just open land. I stood there for maybe half a minute, trying to understand what I'd seen. Then I got back into the car, closed the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for a couple of minutes. The clock said nearly 15 had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked up through the windshield again. The fog was almost gone now. The road stretched out ahead, clear, empty. I started driving again, slow at first, then picking up speed. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more lights, no more fog, just the usual road. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute, engine off, looking out at the street. Everything felt normal, but the way those lights had hung there, perfectly still, too high, too quiet, didn't sit right. They hadn't been approaching. They'd just been there, like they were already in place, waiting for me to see them. I noticed it because everything stopped at the same time. Not gradually. Not like the usual way sounds fade when the wind drops or when animals settle. It just cut out. I'd been sitting by the fire for a while, not doing much, just watching the flames and listening to the forest. It was one of those quiet camping trips where you go alone just to get away from everything. The site was a few miles in, nothing official, just a clearing I'd found before. Tall trees all around, thick enough that you don't see much sky once it gets dark. It had been a normal night. Insects, leaves moving, the occasional distant crack of something shifting deeper in the woods. All of that just stopped at once. The fire was still going. I could see it, but I couldn't hear it. No crackling, no popping, nothing. I sat there for a second, not moving, trying to understand what had just happened. I shifted slightly in my chair. I couldn't hear that either. The silence felt wrong. Not quiet, empty, like something had taken the sound out of the air. I looked around the clearing. Everything looked the same, the trees, the shadows. Nothing moved. Then I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like when you change altitude too fast. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I stood up slowly. The ground felt solid under my boots, but I couldn't hear my steps. I glanced toward the tree line. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint distortion between the trees, like heat shimmer. But it didn't make sense. The air was cold. There was no heat. I stared at it. The distortion moved, slowly. Not like wind. Not like anything I'd seen before. It passed between two trees, bending the space around it slightly. Not dramatically, just enough that the edges of things didn't line up properly. I felt that tightness in my chest. Not fear, just confusion. I took a step back. The pressure in my ears increased. The distortion kept moving, still slow, still steady. It didn't reflect the firelight, didn't cast a shadow. It just shifted the space it moved through. I tried to focus on it. The moment I did, it became harder to see, like it slipped out of clarity when I looked directly at it. I blinked a few times, looked slightly to the side. It became more visible again. I stood there, not sure what to do. The silence pressed in around me. Even my breathing felt muted. The distortion moved closer, not directly toward me, just across the clearing. Parallel, like it was following a path I couldn't see. The trees behind it looked wrong, stretched, then normal again. Once it passed, I felt the pressure peak, a dull, steady weight in my ears. I swallowed again. Still nothing. The distortion slowed, then stopped, right at the edge of the clearing. I held still, watching it, waiting. It didn't move, just sat there, barely visible. Then it pulsed, not light, not brightness, just a slight intensifying of the distortion, like the air thickened for a second, then relaxed. At the same time, the pressure in my ears peaked, then dropped. Suddenly, the silence broke, all at once. The fire crackled. Insects started again. Leaves moved. It all rushed back in like it had been waiting. I flinched slightly at the sound. Looked around. Everything seemed normal again. I turned back toward the tree line. The distortion was gone. Nothing there, just trees. Shadows, the same as before. I stood there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I looked at the fire. It burned normally. The sound felt too loud now, too present. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual. But the time, it didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes. The phone said it'd been closer to 30. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the trees. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. Like the space between them wasn't quite the same. I sat back down slowly, kept my eyes on that area for a while. Nothing happened, no distortion, no silence, just the normal sounds of the woods. I stayed up longer than I planned, watching, listening, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. When I finally went into the tent, I kept the flap slightly open, just enough to see the clearing. Everything stayed normal. But every now and then, I caught myself looking at that same spot between the trees, where the air had moved, like something had passed through it without being there at all. I woke up because I thought someone was in the room. Not a noise exactly, more like that sudden awareness you get when something isn't right before you even know what it is. I didn't move at first, just lay there, eyes closed, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I felt it. The sense that someone was standing next to the bed, close, on my left side, not touching me, just there. I opened my eyes slowly. The room was dark, exactly how I'd left it. Curtains drawn, no light coming through, just the faint outline of the wardrobe and the door once my eyes adjusted. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't sit up either. I just stared at that space beside the bed, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I listened. No breathing, no shifting, no sound at all. I told myself it was just one of those things, waking up halfway from a dream. Your brain's still catching up. I turned my head slightly toward the clock, 2:58. I was sure it had been earlier when I'd gone to sleep, but I couldn't remember exactly. I looked back toward the side of the bed. Still nothing. The feeling didn't go away. It just faded slightly, like whatever had been there wasn't anymore. I pushed myself onto my elbows and looked around properly. The room was empty. Door closed, nothing out of place. I sat there for a second, letting my eyes adjust more. Everything looked normal. I exhaled slowly and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor felt colder than it should have. I stood up and walked toward the door, more out of habit than anything. Checked it. Still locked. I turned back toward the room. Nothing had changed. I rubbed my face, trying to wake myself up properly. Then I noticed the window. Not visually at first, just a slight difference in how the air felt. I walked over to it. The curtains hung still. No movement. I reached out and touched the glass. It was warm. Not hot, just noticeably warmer than the rest of the room. I frowned and kept my hand there for a second, trying to figure it out. The heating wasn't on. The radiator was cold. There was no reason for the glass to feel like that. I pressed my palm flat against it. The warmth was even, not coming from a specific spot. Just there. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. The rest of the room felt normal, cool. Still, I looked at the window again. Nothing visible. No condensation. No light outside. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, checked the signal. None. That wasn't unusual for a moment or two, but it stood out. I looked back at the time, 3:12. That didn't make sense. I was sure I hadn't been awake that long. I stood there for a second, trying to piece it together. Then I went back to the bed and sat down. The room felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, just empty. Like something had been there and wasn't now. I lay back slowly, still looking at the window. The warmth lingered in my hand. I could still feel it. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again. The room was the same. Nothing had changed. I turned my head toward where I'd first felt that presence, beside the bed. Empty space. But something about it still didn't feel right, like I'd interrupted something. I checked my phone again. The signal came back. Full bars. I looked at the time. 3:18. More time had passed than I thought. I sat up again, walked back to the window, touched the glass. It was normal now. Cold. Like it should have been. I stood there for a minute, just staring at it, trying to find any sign that something had been different. There wasn't anything. I went back to bed after that. Lay down. Didn't close my eyes right away. The room felt normal again. The air felt right. Eventually, I fell asleep. In the morning, everything looked the same. Nothing out of place. But when I stood by the window again, I couldn't shake the feeling that the warmth hadn't come from outside. It had come from inside the room. I noticed it while I was still inside. At first, I thought it was just something electrical, like a fridge or a transformer outside, but it didn't sound like anything I recognized. It wasn't really a sound, more like a feeling, a low hum that sat behind everything else. I was in the living room, lights off, just scrolling on my phone. It was late, maybe close to midnight. The house was quiet, nothing unusual. Then that pressure started, subtle, like a faint vibration you can't quite hear but can feel. I paused what I was doing and sat there for a second, trying to place it. It wasn't coming from one direction. It felt like it was above me, not directly overhead, just up there. I stood up slowly and listened. The house was still. No pipes, no appliances kicking in, just that same low, steady presence. I walked toward the window, pulled the curtain aside slightly, looked out. The street was empty. No cars, no people, nothing moving. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got a little stronger. I felt it in my ears, like a pressure building. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stood there for another few seconds, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then I went to the front door and opened it. The moment I stepped outside, everything stopped. Not just the hum, everything. The air, the usual distant traffic, even the faint rustle of leaves, gone. It wasn't quiet. It was empty. Like the sound had been taken out of the space, I froze on the doorstep, half inside, half outside, listening. Nothing. No wind. No insects. Nothing. I stepped fully outside, closed the door behind me. The silence stayed. The pressure in my ears increased slightly, not painful, just noticeable. I looked up. The sky was clear. No clouds, no movement, just stars. But something about it felt off, like it was deeper than it should have been. I stood there for a moment, trying to adjust. The street looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel right. I took a few steps down the path. My footsteps made no sound, or at least I couldn't hear them. I stopped walking, stood still. The silence pressed in. I looked up again, trying to find anything, any movement, any light. There was nothing obvious. Then I felt it shift. That pressure, it changed slightly. Moved. Not downward, just adjusted. Like whatever it was had shifted position. I held my breath. The silence stayed. Complete. Then, faintly, I saw something. Not a light, not clearly, just a slight distortion, high above, barely visible against the sky, like a patch where the stars didn't line up quite right. I stared at it, trying to focus. The moment I did, it became harder to see, like it slipped out of clarity. I looked slightly to the side. It became more noticeable again, a faint, uneven patch, moving slowly, not across the sky, just adjusting. I felt the pressure peak, a dull weight in my ears and chest. Then it stopped, completely. The distortion vanished, and the sound came back, all at once. Wind, distant traffic, the faint rustle of leaves. It rushed back in like it had been waiting. I flinched slightly at the sudden noise, looked around. Everything looked normal again. The street, the sky, nothing out of place. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. Then I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual for a moment or two, but it still stood out. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been outside for a minute, maybe two. The phone said it had been closer to 15. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Then the signal came back. Full bars. Like nothing had happened. I looked up one more time. The sky looked normal. Stars in place. No distortion. No movement. I went back inside and closed the door. The house felt normal. The quiet sounded right. But that feeling, that pressure, didn't fully leave right away. It faded slowly, like whatever had been above had taken a moment to move away. The power went out while I was halfway through making tea. No flicker, no warning. Just everything cutting off at once. The lights, the kettle, even the faint hum from the fridge. I stood there for a second in the dark, hands still on the counter, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I reached for my phone, turned the flashlight on, and stepped into the living room. The whole street was out. No porch lights, no street lights, nothing in any of the houses across from me. Just that dim gray outline of everything under the night sky. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the sky. I didn't notice it right away. I was looking for movement, cars, people, anything. But there was nothing. Then my eyes adjusted a bit more, and I looked up. There was a patch of cloud above the houses, slightly off to the right, and it was glowing. Faint. Not bright enough to light anything below it. Just a soft, dull brightness inside the cloud itself. I stepped closer to the window. The glow didn't come from behind the clouds. It wasn't like light from the ground reflecting upward. It was inside them, contained, like something behind the cloud layer was lighting it from within. I frowned and opened the front door. Cold air came in. Still. No wind. I stepped outside onto the pavement. The silence hit me first. Not just quiet, empty. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. I looked up again. The glowing patch hadn't moved. It stayed in the same part of the sky, holding its shape. The edges weren't sharp, but they were defined enough to stand out from the rest of the clouds. I stood there for a few seconds, watching it. Then it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The brightness increased just a little, enough that I could start to see more detail in the cloud itself. Faint layers, slight movement inside it, not like wind pushing it, more like something behind it shifting. I felt a pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, then more noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I took a step forward onto the street. The pressure increased slightly. I looked around. No one else outside. No doors opening. No voices. Just me. I looked back up. The glow pulsed. Once. A slow increase in brightness, then back down. At the same time, the pressure peaked, then eased slightly. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The rest of the sky stayed dark. Only that one patch glowed. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual during a blackout, but it stood out. I looked back up. The glow shifted, not across the sky, just within itself. The brighter part moved slightly to one side, still contained in the same area. The edges adjusted, expanded a little, then pulled back. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just confusion. I stepped back toward the house. The pressure eased again. I stopped, waited, then stepped forward again. It came back. I looked up. The glow was dimming now, slowly. The brightness reduced, the details inside it faded, the edges softened. I stood still, watching it. The pressure in my ears dropped, gradually. Within a few seconds, the glow was barely visible. Then it was gone. The clouds looked normal again, dark, flat. I stared at that spot for a few seconds longer, waiting. Nothing came back. And then, the power returned, all at once. Streetlights flicked on. Porch lights came back. I heard appliances inside the house start up again. The normal background noise rushed back in. It felt too loud after the silence. I blinked, looking around. Everything looked normal again. I checked my phone. Signal was back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure the blackout had only lasted a few minutes. The phone said it had been closer to 20. I stood there for a bit longer, looking up at the sky. Nothing unusual. No glow. No movement. Just clouds, faintly lit now by the streetlights and distant town glow. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt normal again. Warm, familiar. But that patch of sky, the way it had lit up from inside, didn't feel like it had anything to do with the power going out. It just happened to end at the same time. I only saw it because the angle lined up for a second. I was driving back from my sister's place, taking a back road I don't usually use. It cuts through open countryside, no streetlights, just hedges and the occasional gate or field entrance. It was late. Around 1 a.m., the road was empty. No cars behind me, none ahead, just my headlights and the narrow stretch of road. I'd been driving for maybe 10 minutes when something flashed in front of me, not on the road. Above it. At first I thought it was a reflection from something on the side. A sign, maybe, but it didn't feel right. The reflection was too brief, too clean. I slowed down slightly, trying to focus on where it had come from. Nothing. Just darkness ahead. Then it happened again. A quick glint. Higher this time, or maybe I just caught it better. I leaned forward a bit, eyes fixed on the space ahead. The road curved gently to the right. My headlights swept across the bend, and there it was. For a second I saw it clearly. A surface. Smooth. Curved, catching the light at just the right angle. It wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. Bigger than anything that should be suspended above a road like that. I eased off the accelerator. The reflection slid across it as I moved, revealing more of the shape. It didn't have sharp edges, more like a shallow curve, like the underside of something rounded. The surface wasn't shiny, it reflected the light in a dull way, like brushed metal. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air rushed in, no sound, no hum, nothing to suggest anything was there. I kept driving forward slowly. The reflection came again, stronger. The shape became clearer for a moment, floating, not attached to anything. No cables, no supports, just there. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just confusion. I tried to judge the height. It was well above the road, higher than a truck, higher than anything that should be there. The reflection shifted again, then it tilted. Just slightly, a small rotation, enough to change how the light hit it. And then it was gone. Not drifting, not speeding off. It shot straight upward, instantly. No buildup, no acceleration curve, just one position, then nothing. I flinched and hit the brake harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing, just the dark sky. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, turning slowly, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement, no light, no sound. I listened. No wind, no distant cars, just silence. I stood there for maybe half a minute, waiting. Nothing came back. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal, no warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it not long before. It had been around 1:14. Now it read 1:29. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the tilt. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again, slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No reflections, no shapes, just empty. I kept glancing up through the windshield. Nothing, no sign of anything above me. The rest of the drive passed without anything unusual. When I got home, I parked and sat there with the engine off, looking out at the street. Everything felt normal again. The quiet sounded right. But the way that surface had moved, it hadn't accelerated, it hadn't built speed. It had just changed position. Like it wasn't moving through the air at all. Just leaving it. I noticed it because I wasn't thinking about anything at all. I was just walking home, same route I always took. It cuts through a quiet residential stretch, then along a longer road with no houses for a bit before looping back toward my street. It was late. Around 10:45, maybe closer to 11. No rain, but the air felt damp like it had rained earlier. Streetlights spaced out, leaving patches of darker ground between them. I just passed the last house on the corner when I saw it. My shadow split. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the light. There were two streetlights close together, slightly offset. But I'd walked that route plenty of times. The shadows always stretched and overlapped. They didn't separate. This time, they did. Two distinct shapes. Both mine. Both moving with me. I slowed down without meaning to. The shadows stayed separate, one slightly to the left, one to the right. Not overlapping, not blending, just two. I stopped walking, they stopped too. I shifted my weight slightly, both shadows moved, perfectly in sync, but still separate. I looked up. There was only one streetlight directly above me. The next one was too far down the road to cast that kind of effect. I turned slowly. The shadows rotated with me. Still two, still distinct. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I took a step forward. The shadows followed. Then they merged, back into one, clean, like nothing had happened. I stopped again, looked down. One shadow, normal. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I heard something. Not a sound exactly, more like a faint shift in the air. I looked up. The sky above was mostly clear. A few thin clouds drifting slowly, but there was a dim light overhead. Faint, barely noticeable. It wasn't like a star, too diffuse, and it wasn't moving like a plane, so it just hung there. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The moment I did, it seemed to fade slightly, like it slipped out of clarity. I looked slightly to the side. It became more visible again. A soft, uneven glow. I stood there, watching it. The street felt quieter than it should have. The usual distant sounds were gone. Even my own breathing sounded dull. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual for a second or two, but it stood out. I looked back up. The light pulsed. Once. Very faint. At the same time, I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I shifted my stance. The pressure stayed. I looked down at the ground again. My shadow was still one. Normal. I moved my arm slightly. It followed. Nothing strange. I looked back up. The light was dimming. Slowly. Not moving. Just losing intensity. The edges softened, the center faded until it was barely there. Then it was gone. No movement, no trail, just empty sky. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually, until it felt normal again. The distant sounds returned, faint at first, then clearer. I stood there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I looked down again. One shadow, normal. I took a few steps forward. Everything felt right. The rhythm of my footsteps, the sound of them. I walked under the next streetlight. The shadows stretched and shifted like it always did. Nothing unusual. I checked my phone again. Signal came back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only stopped for a few seconds. Maybe half a minute. The phone said nearly 10 minutes had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I kept walking. The rest of the way home was uneventful. No more lights. No more shadows doing anything strange. When I got to my door, I paused for a second. Looked back down the road. Everything looked normal. Streetlights, empty pavement, nothing out of place. But the way my shadow had split, not stretched, not doubled by angle, just separated into two distinct shapes, didn't feel like it had anything to do with the lights at all. It felt like something else had been there, just for a moment, standing slightly offset from me, before falling back into place. I was already awake when it happened. Not fully up, just lying there, that in-between state where you're aware of the room but not really thinking about anything. The sky outside was still dark, just that faint gray hint that morning was coming. I turned onto my side and checked my phone. 5:07. Too early to get up. I set it back down and stared at the window. The curtains were slightly open, just enough to see a slice of the sky beyond the houses across the street. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought it was just the start of sunrise, a faint light creeping in. But it wasn't spread across the horizon like it should have been. It was a line, a narrow vertical strip of brightness cutting upward into the sky. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The rest of the horizon stayed dark, just that one section glowing. I pushed myself up slightly, resting on one elbow. The line didn't widen, didn't spread sideways, it stayed thin, like a column of light rising straight up. I frowned and sat up properly. The room felt quiet, too quiet. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. Walked closer to the window. The air felt still. No sound from outside. No early morning traffic. Nothing. I pulled the curtain aside a bit more. The line of light was clearer now. Still narrow. Still perfectly vertical. It extended from just above the rooftops up into the sky, fading slightly as it reached higher. But the base of it, where it met the horizon, was brighter, more defined. I stared at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. It didn't behave like sunlight. There was no gradual spread, no soft glow, just that clean, straight strip. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like when you go through a tunnel. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I leaned closer to the glass. The line didn't flicker, didn't move, just held steady. Then it changed, not by spreading, by retracting. The brightness started to pull upward, slowly at first, like the bottom of the line was lifting away from the horizon. I felt my chest tighten slightly, not fear, just confusion. I kept watching. The lower part of the light faded as it moved up. The line became shorter, still vertical, still straight, just shrinking from the bottom. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull, steady weight. I pressed my hand lightly against the window. The glass felt normal, cold. I looked back at the sky. The line continued to retract, higher, higher, until only the upper portion remained, a thin, faint segment against the darker sky. Then it pulled in completely. Gone. No fade, no spread, just gone. The sky returned to its normal dim gray, the kind you expect just before sunrise. I stood there for a second, staring at the empty space, waiting. Nothing came back. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually, until it felt normal again. Then the sounds returned. Faint at first, a car somewhere in the distance, a bird, the usual early morning noise. I checked my phone, no signal. That wasn't unusual for a second or two, but it stood out. I looked at the time, 5:24. That didn't make sense. I was sure I'd only been standing there for a minute, maybe two. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then the signal came back. Full bars. I looked back at the sky. It was starting to brighten normally now, a soft, even glow spreading across the horizon. No lines, no shapes, just the usual sunrise. I stayed there a bit longer, watching. Everything behaved the way it should. The light spread gradually. The sky shifted from gray to pale blue. Nothing unusual. I went and made tea after that. Tried not to think about it too much, but every now and then I'd glance back at the window, half expecting to see that line again, not because it belonged there, but because it had looked too deliberate. Too precise, like it wasn't the sky changing, but something in front of it moving out of the way. I stepped outside because I thought I heard something in the garden. It was late, maybe just past 11. The house had been quiet, and I was half watching something on TV when I thought I heard a faint knock or shift outside. Not loud, just enough to make me pause. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I stood there for a second, then grabbed my keys out of habit and went to the back door. When I opened it, the air felt colder than I expected. Still. No wind at all. I stepped out onto the patio and looked around. The garden was empty. Fence, shed, same as always. No movement, no sound. I was about to go back inside when my ears popped. Sharp and sudden, like when you go up an elevation too fast. I winced slightly and swallowed, expecting it to clear. It didn't. The pressure stayed, a dull, steady feeling in both ears. I frowned and stepped further out into the garden. Another pop, stronger this time. I stopped walking. The air felt heavier. Not in a way I could see, just something I could feel in my chest and ears. I looked up without really thinking. The sky was mostly clear, a few thin clouds drifting, but you could see most of the stars. That's when I noticed the light. At first I thought it was just a star I hadn't paid attention to before, but it was moving, slowly. Not in a straight line, not like a plane. It drifted. Subtle, like it was adjusting rather than traveling. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The light was dim, not bright enough to stand out immediately, but once I saw it, I couldn't ignore it. It moved between two faint patches of cloud, didn't disappear behind them, just dimmed slightly, like it was inside them instead of behind. The pressure in my ears built again. I swallowed. Nothing changed. I rubbed the side of my jaw, trying to clear it. Still nothing. I took a step back toward the house. The pressure eased slightly. I paused, then stepped forward again, and it came back. That made me stop completely. I looked up again. The light had shifted slightly to the left, still slow, still silent. I listened. There was no sound, No engine, no distant hum, just that same empty quiet. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual for a moment or two, but it still stood out. I looked back up. The light stopped. Not completely still, but close enough. The movement slowed until it barely changed position. The pressure in my ears peaked, a dull, heavy feeling that made me wince slightly. I stood there, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to go back inside, but I didn't. I kept watching. The light brightened slightly, just enough to make it clearer against the sky. And for a moment it felt closer than it should have been. I couldn't judge the distance properly. It didn't behave like something far away. It felt lower. I took another step back. The pressure eased again. I looked down for a second, then back up. The light was still there, but dimming now, slowly, like it was fading into the sky. The edges softened, the brightness reduced, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. No movement, no trail, just not there anymore. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty sky, waiting. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually, until it felt normal again. The air felt lighter. I looked around the garden. Everything looked the same. No movement, no sound. I stepped back toward the door, paused, looked up one more time. Nothing. Just stars. I went inside and closed the door behind me. The house felt normal. The quiet sounded right again. I checked my phone. Signal came back almost immediately. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been outside for a couple of minutes. The phone said it had been nearly 15. I stood there in the kitchen for a bit, trying to piece it together. Then I walked back to the door and opened it slightly. Looked out. The garden was still. The sky looked normal. No sign of the light. I closed the door again, locked it. Later that night, I kept thinking about it. The way the pressure came and went, the way the light didn't move like anything I knew, and how it didn't leave. It just stopped being there, like it had only been visible for as long as I was standing underneath it. I noticed the vibration before I saw anything. It was subtle at first, just a faint buzz through the seat, like the engine was idling a little rough, but the engine wasn't on. I was parked up at the edge of a layby overlooking a stretch of empty fields. It was one of those spots you pull into without really thinking, just to sit for a minute before heading home. It was late, around midnight, maybe a bit after. No other cars, no streetlights. Just the road behind me and open land in front. I had the engine off, keys out, radio silent, just sitting there looking out through the windshield. That's why it stood out. The vibration didn't belong. I shifted slightly in the seat, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Then it came again. Faint. Even. Not shaking the car, just present. Like a low-frequency hum you feel more than hear. I frowned and put my hand on the steering wheel. Nothing there. No movement. I pressed my foot lightly on the floor. Still nothing. But the seat carried it. A soft, steady pulse. I glanced at the dashboard. Everything was off. No lights, no indicators. I leaned forward slightly, listening. No sound, not even the usual distant hum of traffic. The air outside felt still. I sat back again. The vibration continued, unchanged. I looked up into the rearview mirror without really thinking. At first, I didn't notice anything, just darkness behind me. The road disappearing into it. Then I saw the glow, faint, soft, lingering just above the line of the road. Not bright enough to light anything up, just a dull, contained patch. I turned slightly in my seat to look directly behind me. Nothing. Just darkness. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was there again, in the same spot. I felt that quiet tension start to build. Not fear, just confusion. I adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow shifted with it, staying centered in the reflection. I leaned closer, trying to make out a shape. There wasn't one. Just that faint light. I looked over my shoulder again. Nothing. No source. No object. Just empty road. I looked back at the mirror. The glow pulsed slightly. Once. Barely noticeable. At the same time, the vibration in the seat deepened. Not stronger. Just heavier. I swallowed. The air felt thicker. Subtle. But there. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it still stood out. I looked back at the mirror. The glow hadn't moved. Still hovering in the same place. Not getting closer. Not getting further away. Just there. I shifted in the seat. The vibration followed. Consistent, like it was tied to the car, not the ground. I reached for the door handle, paused, then let go. I wasn't sure why. I just stayed there, watching the mirror. The glow dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. Another pulse. At the same time, the vibration peaked. A steady, low pressure through the seat and up into my back. I took a slow breath. Then the glow changed. Not in brightness, in position. It tilted, just slightly, like whatever it was attached to had shifted. I leaned forward again, trying to see it directly. Still nothing, only visible in the mirror. That didn't make sense. I adjusted the mirror again. The glow stayed centered, like it wasn't reflecting the space behind me properly. The vibration held steady, then it stopped completely. The seat went still. The air felt lighter. I looked at the mirror. The glow was gone, not faded, not moved, just gone. I sat there for a second, waiting. Nothing came back. I turned in my seat again, looking behind me. Empty road, no lights, no movement. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold air hit me. The night felt normal again. I listened. The faint, distant sounds returned. Wind moving somewhere far off. I looked back at the car. Nothing unusual. No lights. No movement. I checked my phone again. Signal came back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for a few minutes. The phone said nearly 20 had passed. I stood there for a moment longer. Then got back in the car. Started the engine. It turned over normally. No hesitation. No vibration. I pulled out of the layby and started driving. The road ahead looked normal. Empty. The rest of the drive passed without anything unusual. But every now and then, I caught myself glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting that faint glow to still be there, not behind me, but inside the reflection itself. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. I don't remember waking up gradually. 1 second I was asleep, the next I was alert, like something had just happened and I'd missed it. The room was dark. Not pitch black. There was a faint bit of light from outside, enough to make out shapes. The dresser, the door, the edge of the chair in the corner. But the first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw. It was the feeling, like someone had just been in the room. Not in a vague way. Specific. Close. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, nothing out of place. But the feeling didn't fade right away. It hung there, like I'd opened my eyes a second too late. I turned my head slowly toward the door. Closed. Exactly how I'd left it. I looked toward the corner. Nothing. The room looked normal. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor was cold. I walked to the door and opened it quietly. The hallway was dark and empty. I listened again. Nothing. No sounds from the rest of the house. I closed the door and leaned against it for a second, trying to shake that feeling. Then I noticed the air. It felt different. Not the whole room, just one part, near the window. I turned and looked. The curtains were still drawn, just slightly parted in the middle like I always leave them. I walked over slowly. The closer I got, the more noticeable it became. The air near the window was warmer, not by much, but enough that it stood out. The rest of the room was cool. That one area wasn't. I held my hand out, hovering just in front of the glass. There it was, a faint pocket of warmth. I moved my hand left. Cool. Right. Cool. Back to the center. Warm again. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. The heating had been off for hours. The window shouldn't have been warm. If anything, it should have been colder. I touched the glass. It felt normal. Cool. But the air just in front of it, that was warmer. Like something had been there, close to it. I stepped back slightly, looking at the curtains. They hadn't moved. No sign they'd been disturbed. I checked the latch. Still locked. I pulled the curtain aside a bit and looked out. The street was empty. No lights. No movement. Just the faint outline of parked cars and the road stretching out. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The room felt quieter than it should have. Not silent. Just muted. Like the usual background noise was missing. I stood there for a minute, listening. Then, slowly, the normal sounds came back. Faint. Distant. The kind of things you don't notice until they're gone. I stepped away from the window. The air felt normal again. I walked around the room, checking everything. Nothing out of place. No signs of anyone being there. I went back to the bed and sat down. Checked my phone. 3:28 a.m. That seemed late, but not unreasonable. I didn't remember waking up before that. Didn't remember any noise or disturbance. I sat there for a bit, thinking. Then I looked back at the window. The warmth was fading. Still there, but less noticeable. I stood up and walked over again. Held my hand out, still warmer than the rest of the room, but cooling, gradually. I waited there, watching it change. After a minute or two, it felt normal again. No difference. Just the same cool air as everywhere else. I stepped back. The feeling that someone had been there started to fade too. Not completely gone, just less immediate. I went back to bed, lay down, staring at the ceiling. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't feel like I needed to. The room looked the same, but I couldn't shake the sense that I'd missed something, like I'd woken up just after something had happened. Eventually, I closed my eyes again. Sleep came slowly. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same, nothing out of place. I went over to the window, checked it again. The air felt cool, no warmth, no difference. I opened it and leaned out. The outside air felt normal too, nothing unusual. I closed it again. For a moment I just stood there, looking at the glass, trying to picture what it would have looked like from the other side. Then I noticed something small, a faint patch on the glass, barely visible, only at a certain angle, like a smudge. Not shaped like a hand, not anything clear, just an uneven area, right where the warmth had been. I touched it. The glass felt normal, cool. I wiped it with my sleeve. The mark faded, then disappeared. I stood there for a second longer, then stepped back. Everything looked exactly how it should. But that feeling that someone had been there didn't feel like it came from nothing. I first noticed them because they were too high. I was driving home from my sister Leah's place, cutting through a stretch of road that runs along the edge of a wooded area. It's not a main road, just a narrow two-lane with no streetlights, the kind you only use if you know it's there. It had been clear when I left. About 10 minutes into the drive, the fog started. Not gradual. It just rolled in across the road in thick patches, like low clouds settling between the trees. I slowed down straight away, dropping to maybe 30. The headlights bounced back at me, turning everything white past a certain point. The lines on the road were still visible, but anything beyond that faded into haze. I turned the radio down without thinking. That's when I saw the lights. At first I thought it was a car coming toward me. 2 headlights, faint and diffused through the fog. But something about them didn't look right. They were too far apart and too high. I squinted, leaning forward slightly. They weren't moving like a car either. No change in angle, no shift in brightness, just sitting there, ahead in the fog. I slowed down more, maybe 20 now, waiting for them to get brighter as I got closer. They didn't. They stayed the same. Soft, pale circles of light, and they were definitely too high. Higher than any normal car's headlights. Higher than a truck even. I glanced at the edge of the road, trying to judge the height against something. There was a fence line there, barely visible through the fog. The lights were well above it. I felt that quiet tension start to build. Not fear, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I kept moving forward slowly. The lights didn't move, didn't approach, didn't dim, just stayed fixed in that spot. I tapped my brakes lightly, more out of instinct than anything. The road ahead stayed empty. No outline of a vehicle, no shape. Just those 2 lights. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air came in, no sound, no engine noise, no movement in the fog. I looked back at the lights. Still there, still too high. I tried to think of what it could be. Maybe a vehicle on a hill, but the land around there is flat. No elevation changes like that. I moved forward again, even slower now. The lights seemed to shift slightly, not closer, just adjusting, like they weren't fixed to the ground. My grip tightened on the wheel. I remember checking the mirrors, nothing behind me. The road was empty. I looked back ahead, the lights were still there. Then, for a second, I thought I saw something between them. Not a clear shape, just a darker patch in the fog, like something was there but not reflecting the light. I blinked and leaned forward. It was gone. Or maybe I'd imagined it. The lights didn't change. Still steady, still too high. I slowed almost to a stop. The car crept forward. The lights stayed at the same distance, not getting closer, not moving away, just there. Then the fog shifted. A small break in it, just enough to clear the space ahead. And the lights disappeared. Not dimmed, not moved, gone. The road ahead was empty, completely clear. No vehicle, no source for the lights, nothing. I stopped the car fully. Sat there in the middle of the road, staring at where they'd been. The fog continued to move slowly around me, but the space where the lights had been was just road. I looked left and right, nothing. No side roads, no driveways, nowhere a vehicle could have turned off. I checked the mirrors again. Still nothing behind me. I turned off the headlights for a second. The darkness pressed in immediately. I turned them back on. The road lit up normally. No lights ahead. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed the time. It didn't match. I'd left Leah's at 10:15. The drive should have taken maybe 20 minutes. The clock read 11:02. That didn't make sense. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't taken any detours. I looked back at the road ahead. The fog was already starting to thin. I could see further now. No lights, no movement, just the empty stretch of road. I started driving again. Slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The rest of the drive was normal. No more lights. No more strange patches of fog, just the usual road. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a bit, engine running, looking out through the windshield. Everything felt normal again. But the image of those lights stayed with me. The way they didn't move, the way they sat too high, and how, when the fog cleared, there was nothing there to explain them. I stepped outside because I thought I heard something in the garden. It was just after 9, already dark, and there'd been light rain earlier. The ground was still damp, and the air had that cold, still feeling you get when everything's settled for the night. I stood on the back step for a second, listening. Nothing. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing moving. Then my ears popped. Sharp and sudden, like when you go up an elevation too quickly. I swallowed, expecting it to clear. It didn't. The pressure stayed there, dull and steady. I frowned and stepped down into the garden, thinking maybe it was just something with my sinuses or the weather. As I moved forward, it happened again. Another pop. Stronger this time. I stopped walking and looked up without really thinking. The sky was mostly clouded over, but there were thin breaks where you could see darker patches behind. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just a star showing through one of the gaps. But it didn't stay still. It drifted, slowly. Not in a straight line, not like a plane or satellite. It moved in a way that felt loose, like it was being carried, but there was no wind. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The light was dim, not bright enough to stand out clearly, but enough that once you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. It slipped behind a thin layer of cloud and didn't disappear completely. Just dimmed slightly. That's what caught me. Most lights vanish when they pass behind clouds. This one stayed visible, like it was inside them. The pressure in my ears built again. Not painful, just heavier, like something was pushing inward. I rubbed the side of my jaw, trying to clear it. No change. I took a step back toward the house. The pressure eased slightly. I stopped, waited. Then stepped forward again. It came back. That made me freeze for a second. I looked up again. The light had shifted slightly to the left. Still slow, still steady. It didn't blink, didn't flicker, just moved. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in. Not fear, just a sense that something wasn't lining up. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual sometimes, but it still stood out. I looked back up. The light drifted into a thicker patch of cloud. For a moment, it looked like it might disappear, but it didn't. It stayed there, faintly visible. And then it stopped. Not completely still, but close enough. The movement slowed until it barely changed position. The pressure in my ears peaked. I winced slightly and swallowed again. The air felt heavier, like it had more weight to it. I stood there, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to go back inside. But I didn't. I kept watching. The light brightened slightly, just enough that it stood out more clearly through the cloud. And for a second, I had the impression it was closer than it should have been. I couldn't judge the distance properly. It didn't behave like something far away. It felt lower. I took another step back. The pressure dropped again. Not gone, just less. I looked down at the ground for a second, then back up. The light was still there, but dimming now, slowly, like it was fading into the cloud. The edges softened, the brightness reduced, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. No movement, no trail. Just not there anymore. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually, until it felt normal again. The air felt lighter. I looked around the garden. Everything looked the same. No movement, no sound. I stepped back toward the door, paused, looked up one more time. Nothing. Just clouds. I went inside and closed the door behind me. The house felt normal, warm, familiar. I checked my phone again. Signal came back almost immediately. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd been outside for maybe 5 minutes. The phone said it had been nearly 20. I stood there in the hallway for a bit, trying to piece it together. Then I walked back to the back door and opened it slightly. Looked out. The garden was still. The sky looked normal. No sign of the light. I closed the door again, locked it. Later that night, I went back out once more, just to check. Everything felt normal. No pressure, no lights. But when I stood in the same spot and looked up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking in the right place, like something had passed through there. And for a few minutes, I'd been standing directly under it. The power went out while I was rinsing a mug. 1 second the kitchen light was on, the kettle humming, everything normal. Then it all dropped at once. No flicker, no warning. Just dark. The kind of dark where the house suddenly feels bigger than it is. I stood there for a second with my hands still under the tap, listening. Nothing. No fridge, no clock, no background hum. Just silence. I turned the tap off and wiped my hands on a towel, then grabbed my phone from the counter and turned the flashlight on. The beam felt too sharp in the dark. I walked into the living room and looked out the front window. The whole street was out. No porch lights, no street lights, nothing from the houses across the road. Just faint outlines and a dull, gray sky above. That part wasn't unusual. We get outages sometimes, but the sky looked wrong. Not completely dark. There were clouds. Low, heavy, but they weren't catching light from anywhere. No orange glow from town, no reflection from anything. They just hung there. I stood there for a minute, waiting for something to come back on. Nothing did. I checked my phone. No signal. That part I noticed immediately. Even during outages, I usually get at least something. I moved the phone around a bit, but it didn't change. I went to the front door and opened it. Cold air came in, still. No wind. I stepped outside onto the driveway. The quiet felt thicker out there, like the whole area had been muted. I looked up again. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint change in the clouds above the houses. A patch that looked slightly lighter than the rest. Not bright, just different. I took a few steps forward, trying to get a better angle. The glow wasn't coming from the ground. It was inside the clouds. Like something behind them was lighting them from within. I frowned, trying to figure out what it could be. There weren't any planes, no lightning, no flashes, just that steady, dim light. I stood there, watching. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't staying the same. It was shifting, not moving across the sky, changing shape, like the light source behind the clouds was moving slowly, adjusting. The edges of the glowing patch weren't stable. They expanded slightly, then pulled back. I held still, watching. The rest of the sky stayed dark. Only that one area had the glow. I checked my phone again, still no signal. I looked back up. The glow seemed a little brighter now, not by much, just enough that I could see more of the cloud texture within it. There were faint variations, darker and lighter areas moving slowly. Not like wind, more like something was passing behind them. I swallowed and glanced around the street. Still no one else outside. No doors opening, no voices, just me. I stepped further out into the road. The glow stayed in the same part of the sky, not following me, not reacting, just there. I listened. There was a sound, or something close to it, not something I could hear clearly. More like a pressure, a low, steady presence that felt like it was in the air rather than coming from a direction. I rubbed my ears slightly. The feeling didn't change. I looked back up. The glow shifted again, this time more noticeably. The brighter part moved slightly to the left, still within the clouds. The rest of the sky remained unchanged. I stood there for what felt like a long time, watching, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then the glow started to fade, slowly, not abruptly, like someone was lowering the intensity. The bright patch softened, the edges blurred. The variations within it became less defined. I took a step back toward the driveway. The pressure in the air seemed to ease slightly. The glow continued to dim. Within a few seconds, it was barely noticeable. Then it was gone. The clouds looked like normal clouds again. Dark, flat. I stood there staring at the sky, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. And then, just as suddenly, the power came back. Streetlights flicked on, porch lights lit up, I heard appliances in my house start up again. The normal background noise returned. It felt almost too loud after the silence. I blinked, looking around. Everything looked normal again. I checked my phone. Signal was back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. It said 9:18. I was sure the outage had happened just after 9. It felt like maybe a few minutes, not nearly 20. I stood there for a bit longer, looking up at the sky. Nothing unusual. No glow, no movement. Just clouds lit faintly now by the streetlights and distant town glow. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt normal again. Warm, familiar, but that moment stuck with me. The way the light had been inside the clouds, not reflecting, not shining through, just there, and how it faded right before everything else came back. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a quick vibration through the seat, like something heavy had passed nearby underground. It wasn't strong, just enough to register. I looked up immediately, checking the mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. I was parked at the edge of a small coastal road, just above a stretch of rocky beach. I'd driven out there because I couldn't sleep. It was late, around 1 a.m., and the place was empty. No houses nearby, no streetlights, just the road and the drop down to the shoreline. The engine was off. The only sound had been the faint movement of water below, barely audible through the closed windows. After the vibration, even that felt quieter. I sat still for a second, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe the car settling or a distant vehicle I couldn't see. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, something from the dashboard or maybe the faint light from my phone screen. But it wasn't in the right place. It sat in the mirror like it was coming from outside, directly behind the car. A soft, dim light, not bright, more like a pale smear, slightly blurred. I turned in my seat and looked through the rear window. Nothing. Just darkness. The road behind me stretched out empty, fading into black. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there. Centered. I leaned forward and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow stayed in the same position relative to the mirror, not shifting like a normal reflection would. That didn't make sense. I adjusted it again. Same result. The glow stayed fixed. I felt that quiet unease start to build. Not fear, just the feeling that something wasn't behaving the way it should. I turned again and looked straight back through the rear window. Nothing. No light source, no movement, just the outline of the road and the darkness beyond it. I looked back at the mirror. The glow pulsed slightly. Not a sharp change, just a subtle increase in brightness, then back down. I held still, watching it. After a few seconds, it did it again. I felt another vibration, softer this time, more like a low tremor. It ran through the seat and into my lower back. Then it stopped. The glow dimmed slightly. I swallowed and glanced at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out now. I looked back at the mirror. The glow seemed a bit larger, not by much, just enough that I noticed it. I reached for the door handle, paused. Something about stepping out didn't feel right. I didn't know why. I just hesitated. Instead, I rolled the window down a few inches. Cold air came in. No sound, no hum, no movement. Nothing to match what I was seeing. I looked at the mirror again. The glow pulsed, stronger this time, and with it came that pressure. Not just in the seat, in my ears. A low, steady pressure like altitude change. I rubbed my jaw slightly, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. I turned again and looked through the rear window. Still nothing. No light, no source, just empty darkness. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, and it didn't feel like it was reflecting something anymore. It felt like it was in the mirror. I adjusted it one more time. The glow stayed centered, perfectly fixed. I felt my breathing slow down without meaning to. Everything inside the car felt quieter. Even the faint ticking of the engine cooling seemed to fade. The glow pulsed again, and the vibration returned. Stronger. A steady, low tremor that lasted a couple of seconds, then stopped. The glow began to fade, not quickly, slowly, like it was moving further away. The edges softened, the brightness reduced, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. I stared at the mirror. Nothing. Just the dark road behind me. I turned and looked through the rear window again. Still nothing. No movement. No light. I checked my phone. The signal came back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't make sense. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for a few minutes. The phone said nearly 20 had passed. I sat there for a bit longer, not moving, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I started the engine. The sound felt too loud at first, like it broke whatever quiet had been there. I pulled away slowly, checking the mirrors more than usual. The rear view showed nothing but the empty road. When I got back home, I parked in my driveway and sat there for a moment. I adjusted the mirror again. It felt slightly off. Not in a way I could explain, just not quite right. I tried to fix it, but it never seemed to sit the way it had before. And every now and then, when I check it while driving, I half expect to see that faint glow again, just sitting there where nothing should be. I noticed it because my shadow didn't move when I did. I just turned onto my street, maybe a 5-minute walk from my flat. It was late, around midnight, and the street lights were spaced far enough apart that you moved in and out of dim pools of light as you walked. It had been a normal night. I'd stayed late at work, grabbed something to eat, and walked home like I always do. No one else was around. No cars passing, just quiet. I was walking under one of the lights when I first saw it. My shadow stretched out ahead of me on the pavement. Long, thin, slightly distorted by the angle of the light. Normal. Then I took a step forward, and it didn't. Not right away. It stayed where it was for a fraction of a second, then slid forward to catch up. I stopped, looked down at it. It looked normal again. I shifted my weight slightly. The shadow moved with me. No delay. I frowned, thinking maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. I took another step. This time, I watched closely. My foot moved forward. The shadow hesitated, just slightly, then snapped into place. I stood still again, staring at the ground. The light above me buzzed faintly. I glanced up. It looked normal. No flickering, no change in brightness. I looked back down. My shadow stayed in place, exactly where it should be. I took a slow step forward. Same thing. That slight lag, then a quick adjustment. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in. Not fear, just confusion. I stepped out from under the streetlight, into the darker stretch between them. My shadow disappeared. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but as I approached the next light, I slowed down. I stepped into the edge of the light. My shadow appeared again, stretching behind me this time. I turned slightly, watching it. It looked normal. I shifted my foot. It moved with me. No delay. I exhaled slowly, trying to relax. Then I took a full step forward, and it lagged again. More noticeable this time, like it had to catch up. I stopped immediately, turned around to face it. It lay on the pavement, still. I moved my hands slightly. The shadow followed. I took a small step back. It moved with me. Then I stepped forward again. The lag returned. I looked up at the light above me, still steady. No flicker. I glanced around the street, still empty. No one watching. No movement anywhere. I felt something shift in the air. Subtle, like a change in pressure. I looked up again. At first I didn't see anything. Then I noticed it. A dim light above, higher than the streetlights. Faint, barely visible. It didn't illuminate anything, just sat there like a patch of darkness against the dark sky. I stood still, staring at it. The air felt heavier, not enough to be obvious, just enough to notice. I looked back down at my shadow. It wasn't directly aligned anymore. It angled slightly differently, as if there were another light source, but there wasn't. Not one I could see clearly. I moved my foot. The shadow lagged again, more than before. It stayed where it was for a beat, then snapped forward. I looked back up. The dim light above seemed to shift slightly, not across the sky, just adjusting, like it had tilted. The pressure in the air increased slightly. I felt it in my ears, a dull, steady weight. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stood there, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to move, part of me didn't. The light above pulsed, once, very faint, just enough to notice. At the same time, my shadow stretched further than it should have, longer, distorted. Then it snapped back to normal. I flinched slightly, looked down. The shadow was back in place, perfectly aligned. I looked up again. The light was fading, slowly, like it was dimming itself. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually. The air felt lighter. Within a few seconds, the light was gone. The sky looked normal again. Dark, empty. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I took a step forward. My shadow moved with me. No delay. I took another step, normal. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping, checking my shadow every few steps. It stayed consistent. No lag. no distortion. When I reached my building, I paused under the entrance light, looked down. My shadow looked exactly as it should. I moved my foot. It followed immediately. I stood there for a second, then went inside. Later that night, I kept thinking about it, the way it had hesitated, like it wasn't fully connected, and how it snapped back into place, right when that light above faded out. I didn't think anything of it until Martin mentioned it. He caught me out front while I was putting the bins out, just a normal morning, nothing unusual. He lives 2 houses down, older guy, always up early. He asked, "You all right last night?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He hesitated for a second and said he'd seen lights over my house, not like headlights or anything normal, just hovering. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe he'd seen a drone or something. He shook his head, said they weren't moving like that, said they stayed still for a bit, then shifted slightly, then just weren't there anymore. I asked him what time. He said sometime after midnight. That's when I paused. I'd been home. I'd gone to bed around 11:30. I don't remember waking up at all. I asked him how long they were there. He said maybe a minute. Then he shrugged it off like it wasn't a big deal and went back inside. I stood there for a second, thinking about it. Then I remembered the camera. I've got one pointed at the front of the house. Nothing fancy, just a basic security cam that records overnight. I went back inside and pulled up the footage on my phone. Scrolled back to around midnight. Everything looked normal. The street was empty. Occasional flicker from distant lights, nothing unusual. I kept scrolling. Then I saw it. A flicker. Not like a light turning on, more like the entire frame glitched. I paused it, rewound, played it again. The image jumped, just for a second. Then it resumed like nothing had happened. I checked the timestamp. There was a gap, not huge. A few seconds missing. I leaned closer to the screen, played it frame by frame. The frame before the glitch was normal. The next frame wasn't. It was distorted, not completely blank, but warped. The image looked stretched, like parts of it had been pulled in different directions. There were faint bright areas in it, not defined, just patches. Then it snapped back to normal. I felt that quiet unease settle in. I scrubbed back again, watched it a few more times. Same result. Normal, distorted, normal, with a few seconds missing in between. I checked the rest of the footage. Everything before and after was fine. No other glitches, just that one moment. I got up and went to the front window, looked out. The street looked exactly like it always does. Nothing out of place. I went back to the footage. Zoomed in on the distorted frame. It broke apart a bit, pixelated, but those bright patches were still there. They didn't look like reflections. They didn't match any lights on the street. They were too irregular. I checked the timestamp again. 1:17 a.m. That was later than I expected. I was sure I'd gone to sleep earlier. I tried to think back. If I'd woken up at any point, heard anything, seen anything, nothing. I didn't remember anything unusual. I kept watching that section, over and over, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. Right before the glitch, the frame shifts slightly. Not enough to notice at first, but when I looked closely, the angle was off, like the camera had tilted. Just a fraction. Then the distortion hit. Then everything went back to normal. I checked the live feed. The camera looked stable, mounted exactly where it should be. I stepped outside and looked at it. It hadn't moved, still fixed in place. I went back inside, checked the footage again. Same thing. That slight shift, then the glitch, then normal. I sat there for a while just staring at it. Then I checked the time on my phone. It didn't line up. I'd been watching the footage for maybe 10 minutes. The clock said it had been closer to 30. I frowned, trying to figure out if I just lost track. I went back to the footage one more time, paused it on the distorted frame, stared at it. The bright patches weren't random. They seemed arranged, not in a clear pattern, but not scattered either, like something had been there, just not captured properly. I leaned back in my chair, looked away for a second, then back at the screen. The frame still looked the same, but something about it felt harder to focus on, like my eyes couldn't settle. I closed the app and locked my phone. Sat there in the quiet. The house felt normal, no sounds, no movement. Later that night, I checked the footage again. Same glitch, same missing seconds, nothing else. But when I looked out the window before going to bed, I found myself looking up. Not at the street, at the space above the house. Where Martin said the lights had been, there was nothing there, just empty sky. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever caused that distortion hadn't been fully captured by the camera. I saw it just after the bend. That stretch of road runs through open moorland, no trees close to the roadside, just low grass and stone walls. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and I'd taken the long way home after dropping off a coworker, Amina. There were no other cars out there, no streetlights, just my headlights and the road. I'd just come around a shallow bend when something caught the light. At first, I thought it was a sign. A reflective surface up ahead, something catching the beam for a split second. But it wasn't where a sign would be. It was too high. I slowed down slightly, squinting at it. The reflection came again, sharp, metallic. Not bright like a mirror, more like a dull sheen, like brushed steel catching the light at just the right angle. And it was definitely above the road, not by a little. High, higher than a lamppost would be if there had been one. I leaned forward, trying to focus. The road ahead was empty. No poles, no cables, nothing suspended above it. But the reflection was there. I saw it again, a quick glint, then nothing, then another, like something was turning slightly, just enough for the light to catch it. I slowed down more, down to maybe 30. My headlight stretched out ahead, but whatever that thing was, it only showed when the angle lined up. I rolled the window down a bit, cold air rushed in. No sound, no engine noise from anything else, no movement. Just the quiet of the road. I kept driving forward, eyes fixed on that spot above. The reflection happened again, this time longer. And I saw it, not clearly, just an outline, a shape, smooth, curved. No edges I could define. It didn't look like anything I recognized. It wasn't a drone, too big, and it wasn't moving like one. It just hung there. Still. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just the sense that I didn't understand what I was looking at. I kept the car moving slowly. The reflection came again, stronger. For a split second, the shape became more visible, like a flattened oval, not perfect. Slightly uneven. The surface looked metallic, but not shiny, more like it absorbed some of the light instead of reflecting it cleanly. Then it tilted, just slightly, like it had rotated a few degrees. The reflection shifted across it, and then it was gone. Not like it moved away. It didn't travel across the sky. It didn't drift. It just shot upward, instantly. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No trail, no sound, no fade, just gone. I flinched without meaning to, my foot hitting the brake harder than I intended. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing. Just the empty sky. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The air was still. I looked up again, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement. No lights. Just stars and the faint outline of clouds further off. I turned in a slow circle. The road behind me was empty. The moorland stretched out in both directions, no structures, no sources for anything to have been up there. I listened, no sound, not even wind. It felt like everything had paused. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just staring at the sky, waiting. Nothing came back. I got back into the car, closed the door. The inside felt warmer, but also quieter. Like the sound was dulled slightly. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal, no warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it just before the bend. It had been 1:08. Now it read 1:21. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the movement. It hadn't taken more than a few seconds. I started the car moving again. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No more reflections, no more shapes, just empty. I kept checking the sky as I drove. Nothing. No sign of anything. The rest of the drive passed without incident. No strange lights, no missing time that I could notice. Just the usual road, the usual turns. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute, engine running. Looking up through the windshield, the sky above my house looked normal. No movement, no reflections. I turned the engine off and got out. The air felt normal again. Sound felt normal. I looked up one more time. Nothing. But the image of that shape stayed in my head, the way it didn't move like anything I knew, and how it didn't leave. It just stopped being there. I was about halfway home when I noticed my shadow didn't look right. It was late, maybe just past 11. and I'd taken the longer route back from Marco's place. The streets were mostly empty by then, just the occasional parked car and a few porch lights still on. There were street lights, but they were spaced out enough that you'd walk through patches of brightness and then stretches of dimness. I'd done that walk plenty of times. Nothing unusual about it. I was just moving along, hands in my pockets, not really thinking about anything. Then I stepped into one of the lit sections, and my shadow stretched out in front of me. That part was normal, but it didn't stop where it should have. It kept going, longer than the distance to the next dark patch. I slowed down without meaning to, watching it. At first, I thought maybe I'd misjudged where the light was hitting from, like there was another source I hadn't noticed. But the streetlight was directly behind me. There wasn't anything else. My shadow kept stretching, thin and long, like it was being pulled further than it should. Then it snapped back. Not instantly, but quickly enough that it felt wrong, like something had let go of it. I stopped walking. I turned around, looking at the streetlight behind me. It looked normal, steady, no flickering. I glanced up at it, half expecting to see something above. Maybe another light source I hadn't noticed. Nothing. Just the lamp and the dark sky around it. I turned back and looked at the ground again. My shadow looked normal now. Shorter, in proportion to where I was standing. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Then I started walking again. I told myself it was just a weird angle, maybe light bouncing off a window or something, but there weren't any windows nearby that would reflect that far. The houses on that stretch are set back from the road, with hedges and fences blocking most of the light. I kept moving, a bit more aware now. The next streetlight came up ahead. I slowed down before stepping into it. As I crossed into the light, I watched my shadow carefully. It stretched out in front of me like before. Normal. Then it started to lengthen again. Not as extreme as the first time, but enough that I noticed. I stopped mid-step. The shadow kept extending for a second longer, even though I'd stopped moving. Then it snapped back again. This time I felt something when it happened. Not a sound, more like a shift in the air. Subtle, like the pressure changed for a split second. I looked up immediately. The sky was mostly clear, just a few thin clouds drifting slowly. And for a moment I thought I saw something. A faint, dim light overhead. Not bright, not defined. Just a slightly lighter patch moving across the sky. It faded almost as soon as I noticed it. I stood there, staring up, trying to track where it had gone. Nothing. Just the clouds, moving like they should. I looked back down at the ground. My shadow was normal again. I didn't like the feeling building in my chest. Not panic, just a quiet sense that something wasn't adding up. I kept walking, but slower, more careful. The next section of the street didn't have a light for a while. It was darker there, with trees lining one side and a fence on the other. I could still see my shadow faintly from a distant light behind me, but it wasn't as clear. As I moved through that darker stretch, I noticed something else. The temperature felt off. Not colder or warmer exactly, just inconsistent, like pockets of air that didn't match each other. I walked through one spot where it felt slightly warmer, then a few steps later it dropped again. There wasn't any wind, nothing that would explain it. I slowed down again, paying more attention. Then I heard something. A faint sound above me. Not loud enough to be obvious, but there, like a low hum. I stopped walking and looked up. The trees blocked most of the sky in that section. I stepped out from under them into a small gap where I could see more clearly. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I caught it. That same dim light. Higher this time, moving slowly. It didn't travel in a straight line. It drifted slightly, like it was adjusting its path. The hum got a bit stronger, still faint, but more noticeable now that I was focusing on it. I stood there watching. The light didn't blink or flicker. It just moved. Then it dimmed. Gradually, like it was fading into the sky, and as it did, the hum faded with it, until it was gone. I stayed there for a few seconds longer, listening. Nothing. The street was quiet again. I looked down at the ground. There was barely any shadow now, just a faint outline from the distant light. I started walking again. The next streetlight came up ahead. I hesitated before stepping into it. Then I did. My shadow formed in front of me. Normal. For a second. Then it stretched again, longer than it should have. This time I didn't stop. I kept walking forward, watching it. It extended ahead of me, thin and distorted. Then it snapped back. At the exact moment it did, I felt that same shift in the air, and I heard the hum again, stronger this time. I looked up. The light was back, directly above me, not far up, still dim, but clearer than before. I couldn't make out a shape, just a glow, a small, contained area of light that didn't match anything else in the sky. It wasn't moving now. It was just there. The hum stayed steady. I stopped walking. My shadow stretched again, even though I wasn't moving. Longer and longer, pulling away from my feet. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Not pain, just pressure. I took a step backward. The shadow snapped back immediately. The light above dimmed. The hum dropped in pitch. I took another step back. The light faded further. The hum softened. I didn't turn around. I just kept stepping back, slowly. Each step made the light dim more. The hum grew quieter, until it was gone. Completely. I stood there, breathing a bit heavier than I expected. The streetlight buzzed faintly above me. My shadow looked normal again, short in proportion. I looked up. The sky was empty. No glow, no movement. Just the same thin clouds drifting. I didn't stop again after that. I walked straight home, not looking up. When I got to my street, everything felt normal again. The air was consistent. The lights behaved like they should. My shadow stayed where it was supposed to. I unlocked my door and went inside. Later that night, I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlight in front of the house. I watched my shadow on the pavement for a while. It didn't stretch. It didn't move on its own. It just stayed there. But every now and then, I caught myself looking up, expecting to see that faint light again, and wondering how something overhead could change something on the ground without leaving anything behind. I was sitting out on my porch just after sunset, the kind of slow, orange-pink dusk that spreads over the neighborhood in early September. It was one of those evenings where the air still felt warm, but had a dry edge, and a few kids were playing down the street. I'd been outside with my phone, mostly scrolling through some news, but I wasn't really paying attention. My dog, a lean, wiry mutt named Rufus, was lying beside me, his nose twitching in the breeze. I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen, just a normal evening winding down after a long day at the garage. But then I noticed this shape in the sky, almost directly above the trees lining my backyard. At first, I thought it was a drone, or maybe a small plane because it was moving slow and steady, but the shape didn't make sense. It was dark, kind of angular, and it wasn't blinking like an airplane's lights do. It also didn't have any navigation lights at all. I pulled out my phone to try and take a picture. I wasn't even sure why. I guess part of me thought I might be imagining things. The shape hovered there, silent, almost unmoving, just a little wobble here and there like it was hanging in place. I tapped the screen to open the camera, aimed it upward, and started snapping pictures. I took about 5 shots over the next minute or so, adjusting the focus a little. Rufus got up and started growling low, looking toward the woods beyond my yard. I thought maybe it was just a raccoon or something, but then the shape in the sky changed. It shifted from this dark, rigid-looking form to a more amorphous, almost liquid-like glow. It wasn't bright, just faintly shimmering like a weird kind of haze or heat shimmer. Then it started to pulse, like it was breathing light. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up, and I felt this weird pressure in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, more like intense confusion. I kept trying to take pictures, but the phone kept freezing for a second every time I tapped the shutter. After a few more moments, it suddenly vanished. Just gone. No sound, no flash, nothing. The sky was empty again, except for the usual stars coming out. I went inside, my heart still pounding, and grabbed my phone to look at the pictures. But none of them were there. I mean, the camera app was open, but when I went to the gallery, it was empty. Not just the photos I took, but everything. Like the whole camera roll was wiped clean. I swiped around, tried restarting the app, but nothing changed. The weirdest part was my battery. It was sitting at 12% when I first noticed the shape. Now it was at 3%. I didn't have any other apps running except some music, and the screen time was minimal. I didn't get any warning about low memory or anything either. I plugged the phone in right away and sat down at the kitchen table. Rufus was pacing, clearly unsettled. I kept looking outside, but nothing else happened. The streetlights flickered a little, and a car drove by, but that was it. I spent the next hour trying to figure out what had just happened. I checked my phone's storage and settings, even restarted it. No sign of the pictures or any system errors. Later, I texted a friend who's into tech stuff, and he said sometimes weird bugs or glitches can cause temporary freezes or drain the battery fast. But that didn't explain the empty gallery or the strange light I saw. I didn't tell my wife about it that night, but the next morning I told her everything. She said everything. She said maybe I was tired or stressed, but I knew what I'd seen. A couple of nights later, I went back out to the porch around the same time. Binoculars in hand this time, hoping to catch whatever that thing was again. I didn't see it, but Rufus kept looking toward the woods and growling softly every once in a while. The air felt heavier, like it was charged with something I couldn't put into words. I don't know if anyone else saw anything that night, and honestly, I'm not even sure what to make of it myself. But whenever I look up now, especially during that same time of day, I keep expecting to see that strange shape or feel that odd pressure again. It's like it left something behind in the air, and I'm still waiting for it to show up. I haven't tried taking pictures again since, not sure if I even want to. I work for a small weather station just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Nothing fancy, mostly gathering data from our weather balloons and sending reports to the university and some local agencies. The station is in a pretty remote spot, on a plateau surrounded by forest and desert. Last September, I was on the late afternoon shift, which means prepping the balloons for release just before dusk, then tracking them as they float up through the atmosphere. That day, I was alone at the station except for my dog, Juno. She's a border collie mix, smart as hell, and usually sticks close by. The weather was clear, a bit chilly, with that dry desert air that feels crisp but doesn't bite like snow. The sun was starting to drop low behind the San Francisco peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. I launched the balloon around 6:10 p.m., like I always do. It's one of those big latex ones, filled with helium, with a small package attached beneath it. The camera and some sensors recording temperature, pressure, humidity, and sending it back to us in real time. The balloon floats up slowly, sometimes going as high as 30 kilometers before bursting and falling back. As usual, I switched on the receiver and the monitor showing the camera's live feed. The image was grainy, black and white, but it gave a decent look at what the balloon was passing over. I expected to see the dark outline of the forest and patches of desert moving beneath it as it rose. But then something caught my eye. At about 5,000 meters altitude, roughly 3 kilometers above the ground, there was this dark shape moving alongside the balloon, matching its altitude and speed almost perfectly. At first, I thought it was a bird, maybe a hawk or an eagle, since they sometimes fly high in those parts. But the shape didn't look right. It was too big, too solid looking, and it didn't flap wings or change direction erratically. It just paced the balloon, staying about 200 meters away horizontally, sliding along the same course. I kept watching. Juno sat nearby, eyes fixed on me, probably sensing my distraction. Minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. The object never veered off. No change in altitude, no speed change. It just glided beside the balloon, moving steadily over the darkening landscape below. I called my supervisor Mark on the radio, told him what I was seeing, and asked if he could check from the other station a few miles east. He said he wasn't getting any signals or anything unusual on their equipment. I thought maybe it was just something that only showed up on the camera feed. At 20 minutes, the object suddenly accelerated straight up. It moved fast, faster than anything I'd seen in the sky around there. The balloon camera's view went fuzzy as the distance grew. The object disappeared into the upper atmosphere in seconds, too quickly to track beyond a certain point. The balloon kept rising until it popped as expected, and I watched the sensors report data all the way to the burst. Nothing else showed up on the feed after the object vanished. That night, back at the station, I downloaded all the footage and data. When I replayed the video on my laptop, the object was there, pacing right alongside the balloon, clearly visible as a dark oval shape against the sky. No wings, no lights, just moving smoothly. But the weird thing is, the GPS data from the balloon didn't show any disturbances. Nothing on radar scans from nearby stations. I ran the data through every filter and software we have, and nothing explained it. I showed the video to Mark the next day. He shrugged and said maybe it was a rare weather phenomenon, a trick of light or shadow, but neither of us could find a solid explanation. Since then, I've watched every balloon launch closely, hoping to catch something similar. Nothing. Just the usual slow rise, pop, and data dump. Sometimes I think about how precise that thing was, matching the balloon's altitude and speed for so long without making a sound or a visible signature beyond what the camera caught, and how suddenly it shot straight up, faster than anything I've ever seen. Juno still likes to follow me out to the launch site, especially at dusk. She stares into the sky more than usual, like she remembers something I don't. I keep the footage saved, but I don't show it around. Most people at the station think I'm nuts when I mention it, and honestly, I'm not sure what I saw either.